Toji Fushiguro is one of those characters that even though they never got the craziest amount of screen time in this show, you just can't help but love him. And I don't blame you. The dude is always doing something badass whenever he's on screen, whether that's running on water, fighting cursed spirits he can't even see, or going toe to toe with Gojo himself. And that's not even mentioning his insanely ripped physique he has. So today, after being commissioned by this legend right here, I decided to give my own take on what if Deku was Toji's reincarnation. So if you go on to enjoy today's video, then be sure to do all that usual YouTube stuff. And if you leave wanting more, then check out my collab with That One Weeb, where we did this exact same story, but obviously a lot differently. But without any further ado, enjoy. We begin our story off with the birth of Izuku, as two young parents would be extremely happy at the fact that their firstborn was a boy with green hair. In this specific timeline, unfortunately, I am going to be doing a little bit of a character rewrite for Inko, as well as her husband Hiyashi. Inko is going to be born with a much more powerful telekinesis quirk than the one that she had in the original, one that borders being able to be a hero. And Hiyashi, he's still going to be having that incredible fire-breathing quirk that I assume he has, seeing as we've never seen him or seen how his quirk functions. But in this timeline, I'm going to be saying that the reason that Inko and Hiyashi get together is due to the fact that they wanted to have a bit of a quirk marriage, and they were banking on their kid having an extremely potent quirk. That said, this version of Deku would end up growing up, and as he grows up, his character would be a lot different than the one that we get in the original. He's not going to be knowing Bakugo from his childhood, and his parents are going to be kind of on the thrifty side, in the sense that they're trying to make a quick buck all the time, and their son doesn't really matter to them unless he's, has a really cool quirk, and that's what they're kind of banking on, right? He also is going to be having siblings, which they're also going to be pouring their hearts into. And one thing that Izuku would always note is that they're extra nice to his sister, which is actually going to be named Maki, just, kind of like a little bit of a joke at the fact that she's the other heavenly restriction user. But yeah, that's besides the point. Point being, Deku at this point is going to turn 4 years old, and his parents would have had a sneaking suspicion that he might not have been born with a quirk at all. Unfortunately for Deku, their suspicion was more than correct, but interestingly enough, even though he was born without a quirk, Deku was blessed with something that nobody else in his verse is going to be having, and that is Toji's heavenly restriction. This would lead Deku to being a lot more powerful than many kids his age, and even though his parents would have thought that maybe he has some sort of strength quirk, which would have been very strange for them considering that neither of them have that, when they took him to the quirk doctor to see, they would have pretty much been told that, yeah, he was quirkless and that his strength was probably just him being a very strong boy due to them. They would be extremely disappointed at them, and you could just see their faces shift. Like, if this was animated, both of their faces would pretty much be drawn as like black. Like, their faces wouldn't even be showing at this point, and the only thing you would see are frowns on their faces if they do have anything drawn, right? And we're pretty much going to be skipping to a scene in which Deku's in the car, and it's just dead silence. This kid looks at them and asks them if he can still be a hero, and his mom would actually laugh, saying, "You, a hero, a quirkless hero? You heard that, Hiyashi? Our son wants to become the first quirkless hero." Maybe he'll be a sidekick. Hiyashi would say, "Yeah, maybe he'll even go top 10. Izuku hearing that would be like, "Do you guys really mean it?" And then Hiyashi would pretty much slam on the brakes as they'd be at a red light, turning to him and yelling at him, saying, "What do you mean, do we mean it? Of course we don't. You're quirkless. You're useless. You're a mutt. Damn it, you're a mutt." Deku hearing that would just kind of stay silent and like, and he's just sitting there literally wondering like what the heck he did wrong, right? The dude's literally like 4 years old, and his parents are treating him like he's the scum of the earth. After this would happen, they would end up driving for about 7 more minutes, and eventually Hiyashi would tell Deku to grab his stuff and to have a nice life, as he would pretty much kick Deku out of the car, and Deku would be face to face with this really large orphan-like home. Deku, seeing this, would wonder if this is really real, if it's not just a bad dream that he's having. The kid would start breaking down in tears, and mind you, yes, he has heavenly restriction, but his body is so weak at this point in the story that he has zero access to that crazy strength that, well, yes, he's a lot stronger than other kids his age, he's still a boy. You know what I mean? Like, he has the strength of a 14-year-old as a 4-year-old, just to put it into perspective, right? Because his body cannot go further than that. It's just too weak, and it can't handle the full power of the heavenly restriction at the moment. Or so this is how I'm choosing to go about it. That said, Deku making his way inside of the orphanage would pretty much end up just walking inside, and the people in there would ask him what he's doing there. Izuku would go on to tell them that his parents just left him here and told them to have a nice life. They would look at him and feel bad for him, asking him what his name is. He'd be like, my name's Izuku Midoriya. And they ask, all right, Izuku, well, what's your quirk? Maybe we can get you adopted. And, you know, Deku was just like, I'm quirkless. The second that this man says that, he just sees the smiles on their faces just disappear. Because they're like, all right, this kid's clearly going to be stuck with us until he's 18. Like, they just had absolutely zero faith that anybody was going to be adopting him. And so we'd pretty much just see Zuku be taken to a room where there'd be a bunch of kids, and there's not even enough beds. So kids have to share a bed in this orphanage, right? It's 2, if not 3 kids per bed. So Deku walks inside, and like, I'm not going to make it seem like it's inhumane conditions or dirty or anything, but it's not like, because it's not like filthy, but it is kid dirty. If you guys can like kind of see what I'm trying to say. And when Deku comes inside, he would be greeted by a couple of the kids, one of them asking him what his name is, and Deku saying what his name is, and they would then ask him what his quirk is and stuff. And Deku, after saying that, would say he's quirkless. Suddenly that kid's smile and good attitude just completely disappears, as he would say, that's perfect. You won't be competition for us then. We have a better chance of getting adopted. So just go over there and stay out of our way, the kid would say. Deku would get shoved to the ground, and he'd just be like, what the heck? Like, why is everybody so mean to me? This dude is literally having the worst day of his life. He found out he was quirkless like 2 hours ago, and now he's here. So right after this would happen, we're going to be having a little bit of a time skip to about, let's say, maybe a month. Right? After a month would pass, Deku would kind of understand how this place works, realizing that right here, there's some kids that are, you know, friends with each other, and they kind of try to help each other get adopted, but deep down, all of them only want themselves to be adopted, and they kind of are willing to backstab each other for the chance to leave this place. They hate it here. Deku hates it a little bit more than the others because everyone's ganged up on him, and anytime that some adults would come in and, you know, they start looking at the children available, kind of like they're adopting puppies, would go up towards, you know, the direction of Deku, and, you know, he looks like a really, you know, nice kid. He's pretty quiet, and that's what most people are looking for, you know, just a kid who's quiet, you know, so they can adopt somebody. And you know, as this happens, they're like, what's your name? You know, some of the other kids would come in and be like, oh, that's Izuku, but you don't really want to adopt him. I heard he has a little bit of a troubled past, and he's also quirkless, so he's a bit what's the word I'm looking for? He's a bit self-conscious. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. The parents hearing that would be like, oh, right, quirkless, as they would walk away from Deku saying, well, it was nice to meet you. And this is just something that eventually just happened always. All those kids that Deku would have met would eventually have gotten adopted, and Deku would have just stayed there. As long as he would remain there, there would always be kids coming and going, and as time would pass, Deku would not lose hope to be adopted until he turns the age of about 8 years old. Now he's at that age where nobody really wants to adopt a kid that's that old, so Deku would kind of just sit there and accept it. He's going to be stuck here for years. Deku's life wouldn't get any easier as time would pass. Kids that were also adopted and were at his age and also weren't, you know, being chosen because of the fact that they're older would always try to pick on him and make fun of him and, you know, make sure that he got the worst of everything because they thought they were stronger than him because he was quirkless. But Deku eventually just gets tired of it. This version of Deku just starts kind of hating the world for the cards that it dealt him, and he would realize that if he doesn't want to be pushed around, he needs to do something about it. So one day, as a boy let's say he has a hardening quirk. Yeah, let's say he has a hardening quirk similar to Kirishima, but when he hardens himself, his skin turns into like tetsu kind of, you know, similarly to that. But maybe the color that his skin turns into isn't iron. Maybe it's like metal or something. I don't know. The point is he has a hardening quirk, and you know, he tries to throw a punch at Deku for, you know, retaliating because he tried to take a blanket from Izuku because he was cold that night, and Deku's just not having it. Like, he was just tired of being pushed around, so he proceeds to just punch the boy in the face, and he breaks his hardening quirk and sends him straight up to the nurse that they have there. After this would happen, people would quickly learn not to mess with Deku, but whenever some, you know, kids would come in that, you know, their parents died to a hero attack, or some, maybe, you know, they just had unfortunate circumstances, but they, you know, wanted to get adopted, or they were stronger than Deku, and they kind of saw that people treated him badly. They thought he was easy picking, so people would like try to mess with him and gang up on him and stuff like that. Deku would just beat them up, and eventually he would get the reputation of this like kid that just hurts people and fights back. Like, he's like a quirkless outcast. And all this time during the orphanage, like, Deku's just treated like a subhuman. They don't even treat him with respect, is what I'm trying to get to. Power or no power, they don't see Deku as another human. That said, eventually more time would pass, and Izuku would now be at the age of 18, with the main thing that Izuku did all that time was train. Because Izuku had one goal in his mind, and that goal was to become a hero one day. Deku wasn't smart like the one that we get in the original, thanks to not having the best school system, and even the laptop that they would have at the orphanage would be something that Deku wasn't able to access, because other kids would also want to use it, and with there being so many people there, the opportunities that Deku would have to see like stuff for heroes and stuff like that, and like just learn things on the computer and stuff, would be very limited. But whenever he would have the opportunity of going on it, he would use the time to essentially learn calisthenics and to get stronger from home, learning exercises that could build his body without needing any gym equipment. He would also use it to watch All Might videos and pro heroes, stuff like that, because Deku always wanted to be a hero, since his parents had pretty much put that, you know, instinct into him when he was a boy, telling him that he was going to grow up to be a hero and make millions of dollars and yada yada yada. But, you know, like I said, Deku didn't have access to too much, so he was a little bit dumb and a bit clueless as to how the outside world really works. I mean, it's been literal years since Deku's had any sort of real connection to the outside world. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, Deku is going to be 18 years old in this what if, so all the characters are going to be, you know, upped in terms of age, but in terms of, you know, they're like, okay, so here's what I'm thinking. All the students are going to be bumped in age. The pro heroes are going to remain the same. And UA is going to be changed from a high school to a college type school, which is honestly what I think it should have been. I think that a high schooler is just way too young to go into a hero course where they end up learning all the crazy stuff that they do, but I digress. And just for this story to actually work and Deku to hit his physical peak, which is 18, which even still is not even going to be his physical peak, is kind of perfect for this specific story. And it's going to be a little bit more darker, a little bit more jaded in terms of his background. So yeah. When Deku reaches the age of 18, he's pretty much going to end up leaving that place with a old black shirt that has, you know, luckily fit him all these years, and these scruffed up joggers that are kind of old and have a couple of holes in them in the wrong places. You know where the stitching line on the side is at? Some of those parts are a little opened, and yeah, Deku doesn't really have the best access to things. The second that he hits 18, instead of being woken up with a cake or candles or friends telling him it's your birthday, they literally just bang on the door, tell Izuku to wake up, and in the middle of midnight, like it's midnight, bro, they shake him awake and tell him he has to leave. That he's 18 now and they have no reason to take care of him. Deku, you know, seeing that with the kind of like a monotone expression, just like dead in the eyes, just looks at them and just goes, all right, as he grabs his things and makes his way out the door. The night would be pretty cold, but Deku kind of just shrugs it off, deciding that to stay warm, you might as well train. So Deku proceeds to train. The man gets very, very stinky because, like, bro, he just proceeded to train for a while. So it's not like he's stinky in terms of like smells bad, but he just smells like sweat. You know what I mean? Like he smells like he had just worked out, and he didn't exactly have access to like a deodorant at this moment. So yeah, that didn't help. Anyways, the point is, after this would happen and the daytime would finally come around, Deku decides that the first thing he's going to be needing is a job, because how else is he going to afford to live? So Deku would make his way to countless different places asking if they're hiring at the moment, and people taking one look at Izuku would pretty much end up telling him no in a sort of nice way. Deku, after spending most of the day doing this, would finally make his way towards like a pizza parlor where he would walk inside asking for a job of some sorts. This would be in the bad area of town, and Deku had not really cared how bad it looks, because in Deku's eyes, he's more than capable of defending himself. He knows that at bare minimum. So walking inside, he asked for a job, but much like the rest of places, they would deny him. Deku this time would actually be a little bit more emotional at the denial, asking if they're sure that he could be the trash boy, wash dishes. He'll really do anything that they need, and he swears like he really needs this job. They just look at him and say that they're sorry, but they have all those positions filled up right now, and they can't even afford to have another person on the payroll. So Deku, hearing that, kind of just like drops his head in disappointment, and it's just like, look, I get it, sorry. I didn't mean to cause a scene. He kind of just bows in respect, and then from here begins to walk outside. But before he can leave, a man would actually stop him. Now, I would give this dude a name, but I'm not gonna lie to you guys or myself. I'm probably gonna forget it and then end up just calling him the man or something like that. But a man would stop him wearing a suit. He looks like a little bit shady. He has like a cigar in his mouth. He looks like a stereotypical like mob boss or something like that. And he would go on to essentially ask Deku, or tell Deku, to stop right there, telling him that he overheard that he needs some money and fast. As the man would say, "Hey young man, come over here. Couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the girl over there. I heard you need money and fast, or so that must be why you weren't looking for a job, right?" Deku would nod as he looks at the man and asks if he's hiring or something, and the man would say, "Not quite, but I know a way you can make $500 in one night easy," as a big grin would appear on his face. He would ask the kid if he can fight, saying, "You look pretty strong, kid. Just one look at your physique and I can tell that you train incredibly hard." Deku would say, "I guess I could fight, yeah. What does that matter?" The man turns to him and says, "Come on, kid, don't you understand what I'm trying to do here? You need to participate in a fight. It's an underground fight, so the payout isn't the craziest thing, but it's enough to keep you afloat. All you gotta do is get in the ring with the guy, and if you last more than a minute, the 500's yours." Deku would think about this, wondering if this is even the smartest choice, saying that 500, yeah, like it's a lot of money, but he needs an actual job. He would, then feel his stomach start to growl as he realizes that he's hungry and realizes, I need money to survive at least for a night, so sure. He would nod, telling the man that he's available, and the man, after hearing that, would say, "Perfect. All right, well, follow me, kid. Oh, and take a bath. You're weak, kid." As Deku would follow him, and they would eventually end up making their way into like a weird like alleyway type of area. They would make their way towards a door where, in stereotypical what's the password type scene, they would slide over this like little iron door like window thing, and they're like, "What's the password?" And the man is all like, "Oh, the leprechaun is in motion," or something like that. If you guys are able to understand where that reference comes from, then you are absolute legends. Now listen, I'm gonna give you guys a bit of a hint, all right? What's the Daffy? Oh, no, that's too big of a hit. Well, I already gave it away. It's from the Looney Tunes show where, Daffy Duck looks at Bugs Bunny and he's all like, "What's the password? I can't let you in without it." And then he's all like, "The leprechaun is in motion." And Bugs like, "That's not a password. That's a Okay, I'm yapping too much. I'm sorry, guys. I just, I like yapping. I like talking about, things that I like. But I digress. Deku would make his way inside, and he would start seeing a bunch of like mutant type people around, people that look rough, sketchy, big buff dudes are staring him down, like looking at him, being like, huh, what quirk does he have? You know what I mean? Like on some stereotypical, you walk into a bar and there's like a bunch of like criminals and stuff like that, kind of like Tangled. If you guys have seen Tangled, that scene where they walk inside the little duck restaurant or whatever. But Deku makes his way there, and the broker pretty much ends up signing Izuku up for a fight. And unfortunately for Izuku, or technically fortunately because he's gonna win, he's the main character, he would be matched up against one of the strongest characters there, at least top 10 fighter. And this match was really just supposed to be to get an opponent for this guy, because they've been struggling to find matches for him, considering that he's been beating people brutally. So he would sign Izuku up, telling him, "All right, kid, go out there," and he would give him these like bandaged up hands. Like he looks like Rock Lee. Like he has like these he has his knuckles like he has his knuckles wrapped, and he gives them like a clean black shirt that's like a compressor. And he also gives the kid like a pair of like boxing like joggers or whatever. And so now Deku has like that iconic Toji look, and he's ready for his fight. He would ask Deku if he needs a weapon, and Deku's like, nah, probably not. As you know, the man's like, all right, well, hope you don't die out there. Deku hearing that would be like, what do you mean, you hope I don't die? Time would pass by, and finally an announcer would say, all right, in the red corner, we have Deku. And mind you, this is like a cage fight, and the cage is not no regular cage. Like it's a big cage. It's not like a normal ring, right? Because quirks are allowed to be used here, and weapons are as well. So his opponent would walk inside, and it would be just this giant behemoth of a man with like I want to say like a rhino quirk, right? Similar to like the rhino from Spider-Man. He's like really buff, like his skin is super hard. He has like a horn that he uses, and he has like superhuman strength thanks to obviously, you know, having like this rhinoceros type strength. He has an ability where he charges and he's like moves even faster than his body should be able to. It's a pretty interesting quirk, especially for the ring where you're not able to like run away from the dude for long. And Deku seeing this would be like, oh wow, like this guy is strong, right? Like he's not your average run-of-the-mill dude. So this dude just pretty much rushes towards Deku's direction and like tries to like poke him with his horn, but Deku evades him easily, and the man would be stunned, being like, huh, looks like you were able to avoid me. Guess I should take you a little more seriously. So he rushes in going, ah! And you know, he tries to land a punch on Deku, but Deku's able to dodge once more and says, I only need to survive a minute, right? As for the following minute, what Deku would do is pretty much just avoid his blows as much as he possibly can, doing his absolute best to stay out of the way and not like have to even fight him back. Because Deku didn't really want to hurt this guy. It's not like he's done anything to him. He's just there to make quick cash, right? So doing this, eventually the minute would pass and the round would be called over. They would say that this is like a really boring match, and then the broker looking at Deku would pretty much tell him that if he's able to somehow win this match, his payout would be $3,000. Deku hearing that and understanding that that's a lot of money would actually be like, all right. And as soon as the next bell would start and Deku would turn around, he would see this rhinoceros guy charging at him, as Deku would catch him by the horn and hold him on his shoulder as he would say, whoa there, you're coming in a little fast. Like Deku's whole demeanor would have changed from just trying to avoid him and, being locked in on that to just like looking at this man, and you would just see the eyes of somebody that's willing to like do whatever it takes, right? Just that look of Toji, not a killer look in his eye because he's never killed yet. But yeah, he would just have this look of like, I'm about that life, you know what I mean? So Deku would pretty much go on to just uppercut this dude and send him crashing to the top of the cage as he would ricochet down onto the ground, and everybody watching would be like, what? Like, he's so strong. Like, everyone's like all like cheering, and they're like, well, how did he lose? You know what I mean? Like, the crowd's going nuts. The broker seeing Deku would have a huge smile on his face as he would realize that he just caught a new fish, the next big thing in their underground organization. He would walk over towards Deku and tell him that he did incredible out there. So he would tell him how would he like to do this again and again and again, explaining that he could make big money as a fighter here, and that if he agrees to take this job, that he would essentially be paying for everything that he needs, so long as he lets him be his representative. Going on to explain that this would be super beneficial for him because he could give him a place to live, plenty of food, he could even help him get clothes and stuff like that, and explain that this would be super good for the both of them because Deku would make a lot of money and he could get him those fights that nobody else could help him get. Obviously the broker's lying, and Deku could have really just done this on his own and just played the long game and done it himself, but he ends up accepting the man's offer, telling him sure, because the prospect of food and an apartment just sounds too good to pass up. So Deku would end up getting patted on the back by the man as he would say, attaboy, this partnership's gonna take us a long way. We're gonna make tons of money, kid, believe it. And Deku, hearing this would nod as time would pretty much end up passing, and Deku would end up taking more and more time in the ring. He would find new opponents, and obviously these opponents are there out for blood. His next two fights would have been to solidify himself and see just how strong he really is. He would have ended up fighting like the 9th strongest character that was in the ring matches, and he would have ended up having like a really like deadly fighting style. The dude fought with like blade quirks where his hands could essentially turn into knives, or not knives, but like blades that like it could extend, And so he has like a really like deadly fighting style where he just wants to kill you. He's not trying to beat you, he's trying to kill you. So, you know, he would fight Deku, and Deku realizes like this is not a game. At first he dodges them easily, and it would be during this match that Deku learns that this isn't some fair match. Like, these people are willing to play dirty and do whatever it takes to get their money. So during this match, this guy would end up throwing dirt into Deku's face that he would have had in his pocket, and the referee wouldn't call anything. And so as Deku's, you know, trying to clear his eyes, he would end up getting a scar on his side of his chest, as the dude would end up scratching Deku with that, pulling a little bit of blood out of Deku, as he would jump back and be like, what the? And the man would come in to try to stab him in the throat, but Deku would redirect him and use his motion to send a gut punch through his body that would cause the entire ring to shake. The man would be sent crashing into the ropes as he would fall down onto the ground, and everybody just starts cheering as, you know, they start saying he's the next big thing, that he's the real deal, that he just took out somebody that had been undefeated for like 36 matches, and that he had become like a really strong character. And then he'd end up finding like the 7th strongest, you know, who wanted to show off that this guy wasn't legit. And, you know, he comes in with like this rage quirk that pretty much allows him to like get stronger the madder he gets. But even when he reached his peak strength using his rage quirk, it just wasn't enough. Deku's heavenly restriction made him a monster to go up against, and for this match, Deku would have learned that it'd probably be a bit beneficial to actually use weapons. So he would go into this match with that, you know, iconic Toji dagger that he has, like that blade, and obviously he's not going to be using it to try to kill the man, because he's not trying to kill anybody, he just wants to beat him. But he would land a blow that would render him completely out of commission, stabbing him in the side, where if he's not rushed to a hospital, he will die. The dude survives, but not without damage. He would nick him a bunch of times, and he would have left with a purple eye, and like the dude just would have got humbly embarrassed after trying the dirtiest tactic Deku has had yet, of pretty much like coming into the fight and acting like a nice guy and, you know, pretending that everything was gonna go good, and then whipping out a knife and nearly stabbing it in Deku's neck. So, you know, Deku definitely ended up, you know, coming back and being like, nah, see, that's where you got me all the way messed up. So yeah, with that being said, Deku is very strong. It's pretty much just the point that I'm trying to get to. And with that being the case, eventually, as Deku would end up finally rising through the ranks and becoming like the #1 fighter that this club has, taking down every single opponent on his way to the strongest character, which I, you know, just want to say that the strongest one of the whole thing would have been a character named Kendo Rappa. That's like one of Overhaul's subordinates, you know, just to throw him out there. And he would have beat him swiftly, which would shock everybody, because Kendo Rappa is, you know, he's pretty strong. I think he's like Nomu level at least, right? But that being the case, yeah, Deku was able to take him out swiftly, and he would have this really deadly fighting style at the end of it, where he knows how to kill you if he really wanted to, but he still has yet to kill a single person. That said, Deku would have gotten a lot stronger. You know, he would have trained obviously during this time, and he would have he would have grown leaps and bounds, is all that I'm trying to get to. But eventually one day would come where the heroes would finally end up busting their operation, and as everybody's running away, Deku's inside of the cage, you know, like they pretty much ended up leaving him in there, and he just watches as a hero with you know, yellow goggles and a scarf comes flying in, and you know, in comes other like heroes that are sidekicks in this operation, you know, trying to capture people and stuff like that. And Aizawa, seeing that Deku's the one on the ring, tells him to stop right there, that he's under arrest. Deku would be like, why? And Aizawa would say, for being a villain. You know, he throws his scarf at him, and Deku catches it with one hand, as he would ask why the heck he's trying to arrest him just for fighting in a match, with Aizawa telling him that this operation is illegal, coming in to kick Deku. But with Deku seeing that somebody's about to come and try to fight him, Deku's instincts just kick in as he, you know, unintentionally weaves out of the way and pretty much ends up grabbing the scarf that he had already had in his hand to yank Aizawa towards him and punch Aizawa square in the gut, sending him crashing into the cage, as Aizawa would look up towards the direction of Deku. And, you know, Deku's just kind of standing still. He's not like he was going in for like second second round or something like that. But Deku would just look outside as all the policemen were aiming their guns at him, and Deku would just hold his hands and be like, all right, I give up, you know, because Deku's strong, but bro, a bullet's a bullet. It's still gonna kill him, you know? That said, Deku would then be taken to jail for a night, as he'd be explained by Aizawa that what he was doing is completely illegal. Deku would be like, he didn't know that. He thought he was just involved in normal fights, saying that quirk fights, he thought they would have been illegal by now, with how everybody just goes around flaunting their quirks nowadays, and saying that he had no idea. He was just trying to make a quick buck and, you know, stay alive. Aizawa would be like, I don't care, you know, yada yada yada. He throws him in jail and pretty much tells him to find a new way to make a living. As Deku would get bailed out, like literally like 6 hours later by his broker. The bail would have been like $30,000, but he wouldn't have cared because Deku makes him a lot more money than that. So with that being the case, Deku would then be told that he's going to need to participate in a couple more fights, because he did just pay him for his next 3. And Deku, after hearing that, would be like, what, you're going to charge me for that? He's like, yeah, kid, I'm using your money to pay you out. Deku would be like, all right, as we'd pretty much end up getting like Izuku just going back to the fights, understanding that he needs the money, bro, because Deku's goal is ultimately to go to UA, and unfortunately for Deku, that place is not cheap. And it's not like he has like some sort of hero recommendation or scholarship. He's gonna need to pay all of it out of his own pocket, and he's gonna be needing like at least, you know, say 80 grand, you know, for him to be able to go to the school and pay for like all 3 semesters. I think it's 4. No, it's 3 semesters. It's 3 years that they're at the hero school. So yeah, it's pretty, no, let's say it's 120,000 to go to the school, because it's like a college and stuff. So yeah, that being the case, Deku would end up essentially like trying to, you know, save up money. And right now he's at like 60K, 67-ish. So he has a lot of money, but still not enough. So, you know, a couple more months would pass, and as the time for the UA entrance exam would get closer and closer, Deku would end up signing up, making his way towards, you know, the entrance exam area. And on that same day, Deku, knowing that what he's been doing is illegal, like, he feels bad about it, but he has to do it. Like, you gotta do what you gotta do if you gotta survive. And at that point, it's not a crime. It's like, you're trying to live, bro, you know? So Deku has to do what he has to do. And the day that the entrance exam would come around, or at least the week before that, Deku would end up quitting the job with the broker, telling him that, you know, he's done. The broker would be like, what do you mean you're done, kid? This is something that me and you are making a good living off of. You can't do this to me. You know what I mean? Like, I know I'm making like the, you know, like evil mob boss voice. I'm having a blast doing it, by the way. You know, he's like, you can't do this to me, kid. I've made you what you are. You'd be nothing without me. You were a street rat. And Deku just says, thank you for everything. And he just walks out. He's like, listen to me. You know, like, he throws like a beer can at him, and he's like, you won't amount to nothing as a hero. The heroes don't want you out there. It's a tough world out there. You know, he's like just telling him, you're too dumb to pass into school anyways. And, you know, he's like, you'll come back crawling. And Deku's like, whatever, old man. As, you know, he walks out, and he just sighs, realizing that he's all in on this. Like, he has no other way. But obviously he has money to keep affording a different apartment, because he gets kicked out of the one that he's at. So Deku goes and he does that. That's like the first thing that he does, putting a lease on a new apartment, and ultimately, you know, just kind of biding his time until the UA entrance exam would come around. Deku would make his way towards the gym and, you know, pay for the daily membership. As, you know, he goes over there and he's maxing out all the machines. The dude eventually goes up to the staff worker and he's like, hey, do you guys have anything heavier? As the dude would proceed to just max everything out in front of them, and they're just like, no, you know. So Deku just has to high rep everything. The dude's like doing 1,000 reps of each and every single exercise just to feel stimulation. That's how busted this man is. And he's ultimately just like, all right, well, clearly this is not working for me. So he uses like a squat rack, and he maxes out the barbell on it. It literally bends, but Deku's just lifting it like it's nothing. He starts to actually use that as a dumbbell, lifting it with one arm. Everyone in the gym is just like looking at him like, just like, why? You know what I mean? And Deku's just still sitting there kind of clueless, as everyone's like, this kid is like so strong, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's just like one little scenario that I figured would be hilarious to include in this story. But the point is, eventually the UA entrance exam would come around the corner, and this is where I'm gonna be having to change the music for the video. So Xehther, or me, technically I'm talking to myself, please make the music more upbeat from this point. Deku would look up, seeing this gigantic school stand before him, as it'd actually look a little bit cooler than the one that we get in the anime, just because it's a college, so people's quirks at this point are also a little more stronger than the ones that we get in the original, just due to the fact that they've had more years with their quirks, so it stands to reason that that would happen. But that's besides the point. Deku would make his way inside, take the written section of the test, which is the hardest part that he had actually taken. He had been studying for the last couple of months whenever he wasn't fighting, just to try to prepare for this. And even with that being the case, Deku still struggled, getting a score of like 67%. Like that's what he ends up getting on the written exam. So he hopes that he passes because he's so scared of how he performed on that one, because he feels like he barely might have scraped by. But he's hoping to just wow the judges with what he's going to do during the robot section, knowing that he can fight. Quirk or no quirk, he's strong. And he's realized that by, beating people up senseless who have insanely powerful quirks, and should under any normal circumstances be able to just wipe the floor with him. So with that being the case, he would walk inside to the robot section area. I said inside, but it's outside. But he makes his way out there, and a couple of minutes later, as Deku's concentrating, his eyes are closed, he's thinking back to everything that's led him to this moment. He would open his eyes and rush inside the second that President Mike would say, "Go, go, go!" And Deku, blitzing inside, would proceed to use his blade that he was actually allowed to take into the entrance exam, thanks to him being able to take in, like support items. So he took like a blade as a support item, which is like one of the sharpest things ever, right? So he rushes in, and this man just starts absolutely decimating robots left and right. Deku's not over there thinking, oh, is it a 1-pointer, 2-pointer, 3-pointer? Nah, he's just blitzing towards it and just cutting it in half. And he's doing it so unbelievably fast that the explosions that would be left behind aren't even touching him. He's proceeding to just like double jump from building to building, or not double jump, but like wall jump. Like he's jumping from one wall to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, similar to what Mario does. And he makes it to the top of a building where he scouts out the area, seeing if there's more robots nearby, and he just lunges at them. Like this man is on God of War Kratos timing, just killing everything and anything that stands in his way to get to his goal. And by the end of it, by like the 5-minute mark, you would have seen Deku have taken out a grand total of 126 robots. Not 126 points, 126 robots. This man would have massacred through them at such a pace that would actively affect the rest of the contestants, who normally would have had a lot more robot points, but thanks to Deku, that was going to be made a lot more difficult. That said, the 0-pointer would finally be introduced to the mix at the 5-minute mark, and Deku, seeing it, knowing that thing doesn't count for anything, just kind of lets it go, continuing his onslaught of the robots, and this time never having that heroic moment where his body just moves on his own. That said, we would end up pretty much seeing Deku get a grand total of like 200 and something robots at the end of everything, with Deku having wowed every single person that was watching him perform this. All Might himself even would have thought to himself that he should have given this guy his quirk, that he's busted. People in the examination room would be like, what quirk does he have? He must have an incredible enhancement quirk. And people are like, yeah, it has to be some sort of like strength mutation or something. But as Nezu would speak, he would say, no, in his file, it actually shows me that he's quirkless, so it's very much impressive how he's able to do all this without even having a quirk. He's performing better than most heroes would do. In fact, I'd be willing to wager that he would even beat All Might's score. All Might, hearing that, would, have a little bit of a sweat drop go down his face, as he would think that he's not wrong. As after this would take place, we'd pretty much end up getting Deku, hear the bell finally go off and destroying one last robot just for good measure. Deku would just walk away as he puts his blade back into his, like his sheath holder, and it would just begin walking away. People looking at Deku would just look at him in complete amazement and fear and awe, just like a mix of emotions, as Deku would walk past the crowd, having taken 0 damage, and pretty much looks like he wasted 0 stamina on those robots, thinking to himself that was a lot easier than he thought, and he might have even overtrained for this thing. That said, he would make his way home, and having had that performance, since he definitely low-key would have been tryharding, considering that he felt bad about his written exam, he would hope that incredible performance would be enough to get him into the school. So with that said, time would pass, and about a week later, Deku, as he would have been at home training, would have gotten a letter in the mail, as his little house, apartment slit would have like a little note slid under it. Deku would take it, as he would see a projection of All Might saying, I am here. here to tell you that you made it into UA, yada, yada, yada. Deku hears it and he's just kind of looking at it and he's just like, I did it. I really, really did it. He would yell and scream in excitement as his, downstairs neighbor would be like, hey, can you shut up there? Deku, hearing that, be like, my bad, as he yells that. And ultimately, he kind of just sits there celebrating his moment of grandeur as Deku realizes that he's one step closer to becoming a hero, and not only becoming a hero, but proving his parents wrong. In his head, he would think, you hear that, mom and dad? Obviously they don't because it's in his head, but he's doing that because he feels bad. He doesn't want to, upset the neighbor, because Deku admits, he can be a bit of a noisy upstairs neighbor, especially when he's doing his calisthenics and he's dropping weights and stuff sometimes. That said, Deku kind of just sits there and does his thing, and eventually the day would finally come where the first day of UA would finally be ahead of him, and Izuku would make his way towards his homeroom class as he would take a deep breath in and finally walk inside. The second that Deku would do so, he wouldn't be greeted to the sight that normal Deku would get in most of my what ifs, which is Bakugo and Ida fighting, which he definitely does see, but Deku notices someone almost instantly. Inside of that yellow bag, Deku just feels a presence that he's felt before, wondering who the heck is inside of that thing, but he makes his way to the back of the classroom and sits down at an empty desk where there would be one more seat available. Suddenly, Deku would watch the front of the classroom as all of his thoughts would just be completely flooded with looking at one specific girl that would walk inside. Momo Yaoyorozu. She walks in and Deku has that stereotypical anime moment where he sees the girl of his dreams and it's like, hello, is it me you're looking for? You know what I mean? Like something like that. As, Deku just looking at her and she's like, hey, nice to meet you. My name's Momo Yaoyorozu. Deku's like, my name is, he's like stuttering because he's never seen someone that's caught his eye like that before. And like he can feel his heart pacing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. He's just like looking at her and he's like, name's Deku. As he pretty much ends up sitting down, and obviously this timeline he wasn't given that nickname by anybody else but the bullies at the orphanage that he would have been around. So with that being the case, he still ends up getting the name not from Kachan but from somebody else. And finally, as Deku's telling her his name, you would see Aizawa get out of his little sleeping bag, seeing Deku in his classroom and knowing that he was going to walk inside because obviously Aizawa went over the list of his homeroom. He would end up pretty much looking at Deku as staring daggers at him. He would just kind of like nod him to shut up, or no, not nod him to shut up, but he would tell everybody to shut up and put these on, as he just looks at Deku and he's just like giving him like a glare. Deku, seeing that this is going to be his homeroom teacher, would be like, all right, that's just my luck. As after this would happen, we'd have everybody else beginning to leave, as Aizawa would say, not you. You can stay behind, Izuku Fushiguro. Deku would have given himself a different last name just because, he doesn't want to have his dad's last name, considering the fact that he literally gave up on him on like day one pretty much. So yeah, he has a different last name, which I think is a kind of like a cool little Easter egg to include in this series. But with that being said, Aizawa would pretty much go on to just press Deku and just tell him that if he causes any problems in his classroom, he'll expel him, telling him very clearly that he doesn't like him, but the only reason that he's in here is because he would rather have him here learning to be a hero than out there on the streets being a villain, saying that as long as he's here, he's going to keep a watchful eye on him. And the only reason that he's in his homeroom in the first place is thanks to Nezu, so he can thank him for that. That said, he would tell him to put that on and meet him outside, and Izuku would kind of, seeing that and realizing that, okay, he's not going to have a good relationship with Aizawa, would kind of just make his way to the changing room, where this man starts changing and people notice how ripped he is. Like, the dude is absolutely buff. And Kirishima would be one of the first ones to point that out, being like, dude, you're so manly. He'd be like, how tall are you? And Deku's like, I don't know. I never really have checked. He's like, you must be at least 6'4", 6'3". You're a giant. Deku would look at him and say, not really, not compared to most people nowadays. He's like, yeah, well, compared to us, you are. Everybody else is like, what, 5'9", like 6'6", 5'11". They're around that age of, Ida's like a, what, 6'2". So Deku's like dang near one of the tallest in the classroom. And then he's ripped, like he's ripped, right? Like his waist is small. The dude just looks like like just like an absolute Greek statue. Like the man is literally perfection in terms of his physique. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, okay? They make their way outside, and once they do so, Deku, having the best scores that anybody had gotten during the exam, would have a ball tossed to him by Aizawa, as he would go on to explain to Izuku that his goal is to throw it as far as he possibly can, telling everybody that all their lives they haven't been allowed to use their quirks, and that's not fair. Explaining to them that here in the hero course, they were going to be truly seeing how they stack up to the rest of the others. And so Deku would throw the ball, getting a very impressive score, but obviously that's not going to be the most impressive thing that he could get, considering that Araraka could get something like infinity and Bakugo could use his explosion to throw it kind of far. So I'm going to be saying that Deku, I don't know how strong Toji would be in terms of like physically strong, but I'm gonna be saying that he gets a score similar to what Izuku would have gotten in the original, so he would beat Bakugo, I think. I'm not too sure, but if he doesn't, he beats Bakugo in this timeline in terms of the ball throw, so he gets a crazy score for that. And then they have the rest of the events, which is like the 50-meter dash, you know, the sprint, the long jump, the toe touches, the, you know, the push-ups, the sit-ups, you know, and everything else and far in between. And Deku would proceed to absolutely just Saitama the whole thing. Like if you guys have seen One Punch Man, then you would know that there was a scene where this man took like exams for physical stats and he just destroyed every single thing, blowing everything out of the water. Anything that required physical movement, Deku just got greater scores than anybody. In fact, the only thing that I could see Deku practically losing at was the ball through, considering that Araraka, you know, she kind of gets 1,000,000, and maybe the side-to-side jumps because of Mineta's, you know, ball quirk that allows him to do it at the same pace as Deku without using that. We're gonna say this, so he ties Mineta for that. That said, after class would be over and Deku would pretty much be in first place after having just performed so incredibly well, everybody would just be like, wow, like you're so strong, you know, they're like hyping him up and stuff, and Deku's just there kind of like scruffing the back of his head, never having had such crazy positive affirmation like they're giving him here, except obviously in the ring. But those people never got this close to him and were all like, oh, you're the best, you know, or we're this nice, considering that those were like low lives and stuff like that, and the best that they do is be like, go kill him, Deku, like you're the best, you know, like that's all he would ever hear. But that being said, after everything would be over, Deku would grab a towel as he would wipe some sweat off his forehead, and you would then see Momo Yaoyorozu approaching him as she would ask Deku what his quirk was, saying that she was super impressed by how Deku performed out there. And Deku, looking at her, just kind of turns a little red as he's like, I'm quirkless. She looks at him and she's like, what? There's no way. You have to have some sort of enhancement quirk, right? You were moving like no human should ever be able to move. There's just no way you're quirkless. And Deku just looks at her and then says, yeah, I'm quirkless. Been that way for about as long as I remember. I just trained really, really hard. As Momo looks at him and goes, I don't doubt it. If you're this strong and all you do is train, I believe that you must train yourself half to death. Deku looks at her, you know, rubbing the back of his head as he's like, what's your quirk? I've found it super interesting. You created multiple things that made you get incredibly high scores too. Weren't you ranked like second or third? And she's like, yeah, I was ranked second. I was hoping to get first, but I didn't account for somebody like you being here. You're incredible. Izuku, after hearing that, would just start blushing like uncontrollably, and you know, Momo would then hear like a beep as it would be her limo driver, and she's like, well, it was really nice to meet you. What was your name again? And he's like, oh, name's Izuku Fushiguro. And she's like, well, nice to meet you, Fushiguro. She runs off towards her limo and sits inside, and Deku just watches her as this man has like just that stereotypical like you like a girl type look. Like, have you guys seen a Goofy movie? He looks like Max whenever he was staring at that one girl in the movie. But that being the case, you know, he pretty much just makes his way to leave and go to his apartment, but Aizawa would actually be there to stop him, going on to explain to Izuku that he needs to speak with him. Izuku's just like, not again in his mind, but he would follow him, and from here they would make their way to Nezu's office, where Deku would come face to face with the principal of UA. Nezu's chair would be turned the other way around, so Deku wouldn't know what to expect. And then when the chair turns and he sees like a little talking dog, he's just like, what? that's the principal? Nezu would be like, hello. And then, Izuku, I think I just sounded like Stampy right there. Did I not? Chat, be honest. Did I not? Anyways, he just tells Izuku, he's like, well, it's been a pleasure seeing you in action. You're quite impressive. Is it true that you're quirkless? How are you this strong by being quirkless? He just starts asking multiple questions, and Deku just starts answering them. He's answering very quickly. He's like, oh, like I'm quirkless. I have been, like, you could just check. I have like that pinky toe thing. Like, there's no sign showing that this is a quirk. I just have been training really hard all my life. And Nezu was like, training or not, there's no way that the physical human body should be capable of such feats. And Deku just is all like, yeah, but I mean, I trained really, really, really hard. And then, Aizawa just goes, as, we would pretty much get Nezu saying, right, well, I apologize for Aizawa here and how he treated you earlier. He did end up telling me about that, and he brought up a couple of doubts that he has about you. He would go on to ask Izuku if it's true that he used to participate in illegal fights, and Izuku would go on to explain that unfortunately he did, as Nezu would go on to say, well, that's water under the bridge for now. We're sure glad to have you as a hero instead of a villain now, as, Deku just looks at him and he's like, yeah, I never really wanted to participate, but I kind of needed to make money somehow. Nezu's like, we understand, and we know that you don't exactly have too much money, so I'm actually going to offer you a scholarship, as well as housing and money for you to get yourself whatever it is that you need. Everything that you have will be sponsored by UA, and you have no need to pay us back. Deku hearing that would be like, are you serious? And Nezu's just like, absolutely. Well, the scholarship would have been on us, but the housing is Aizawa's idea. He thinks it would be beneficial for us to actually keep a close watch on you to make sure that you don't proceed with illegal activities. We hope you can understand. Izuku hearing that is just like, I don't care, you can watch me all day if you want, if you're going to be giving me this much stuff. And realizing that they practically just gift, like, he's able to keep his money that he was going to use for the school, and he doesn't even have to pay for that apartment. Obviously he does have to, pay for that, the lease that he had. So, that's all he has to pay, like maybe like 10 grand or whatever. But Deku is so unbelievably happy. Like, he practically starts crying from joy, right? Like, we'd get like Deku coming out for a second, right? As we pretty much get, Nezu telling Izuku that he's excited to see his growth, and Deku would say he won't let him down, saying that he promises to become an incredible hero and to live up to all his expectations. After this happens, he looks at Aizawa and thanks him, as Aizawa would simply just tell him not to make them regret this decision. And so, we would end up getting Deku being escorted to his room, or his new house that he's going to be living at, as, he would walk inside to this room and there'd be a mattress on the floor. There's like a little, like TV and a mini fridge with like some waters and sodas and stuff. Deku seeing that would realize, like, this is all me. Like, this is my house, like, he's just so happy. He lays down on his bed, and the dude's happy as can be. He has his own bed, mind you, which is a big deal considering he's had to share a bed for as long as he can remember. And he has his own fridge and his own TV, and obviously he could have bought himself those things previously, but it just hits different because it doesn't feel dirty anymore. Like, it doesn't feel wrong. But that being the case, Deku would just kind of sit there and, reminisce about the awesome day he's had, when suddenly memories would flood him of Momo, as the dude would just start daydreaming about her, just being like, she's so... And as he's thinking that, he would get a knock on the doors. A couple of hours would have already passed by, and as he would hear that, he would answer the doors. He ends up being greeted to the side of Aizawa, as he would ask if he needs something from him. Aizawa would walk inside and pretty much tell him that he wants to be frank with him, as he would go on to question Deku about something, asking why exactly he wants to become a hero if whatever he was doing before probably paid the bills very well. Deku, after hearing that, would pretty much just signal Aizawa to come sit down, and Aizawa was like, I think I'll stay standing. Deku would kind of just, lay down on the ground, so like he's sitting on his mattress, which is on the floor, so he's kind of like close to the floor, and he just looks up at Aizawa and he's like, well, I'd be lying to you if I said that I want to become a hero because I'm just a goody-goody. Aizawa hearing that would say, I expected as much, so why do you want to be a hero? And Deku looking at him would go on to say that he wants to be a hero because he wants to prove his parents wrong, and he wants to show everybody in the world that he's not just some bum. Going on to, kind of let Aizawa into a little bit of a backstory, as Aizawa would stop him before he can get too detailed on it, and telling him that he doesn't need all that. he just wanted an honest answer and he thinks he got one. He would then tell him that he's going to be watching him and not to disappoint him, or he'll have to step in, as Deku would chuckle and throw a little jab towards Aizawa, being like, yeah, like you did last time. And Aizawa, remembering that gut punch that he would have got from Deku, would glare at him as he's like, don't get ahead of yourself, you're still a student. As Deku would just be like, yeah, and he would just lay back down on his bed, looking up at the roof as he would just start thinking of what life holds for him. Like, what's the future gonna be like? Deku would get excited just thinking about that, and before you know it, the very next day would finally come around. Deku would find himself in class and find himself already struggling with the curriculum on day one. The person right next to him would notice that and would actually end up cracking a joke about it, asking if he needs some help. Deku, seeing that Momo was offering some help, would just immediately be like, yeah, I don't really understand all this stuff. As she looks at him and she's like, yeah, I mean, I get it, you're all muscles, right? As Deku looks at her and goes, hey, I don't fit that stereotype. I just didn't have the luxury of being in school for much of my life. As Momo, hearing that, kind of feels a little bit bad for making that joke, but she acts like she didn't hear it, and then would proceed to actually start helping Deku. This weird awkwardness wouldn't last long because Deku immediately just starts paying so much attention to her. This man starts picking up the material so much better just because Momo's teaching him, and he's having such an easy time learning it because it's like the girl's teaching it to him, you know what I mean? Like the pretty girl in the class or whatever. And so as she starts helping him, this dude's like blushing and they're having like a little laugh moment and stuff like that. And you just got Mineta and Kaminari watching Deku, and they're not gonna change. It might be college, but bro, they're not gonna change his characters. They're jealous of Deku and they're like, I wish I was him. Da, 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 da. And so finally class would end, and you would just see Momo grabbing her books and her things saying, well, I'll see you at lunch. As Deku, seeing that, sees her walk away, and he's just like, she is so, but before he can even finish that, he would pretty much end up being woken up by Aizawa out of his daydream. He's like, hey kid, get out of here, lunch started. As he makes his way to the cafeteria, and he would pretty much be the last one there, having to have go to take a leak real quick before he made his way there. So Deku would make his way there. He's looking around, he's seeing that everybody's pretty much already had their table, and realizing this, he goes, grabs his lunch, and is having a blast because, mind you, Yue has like one of the best chefs in the world as their cook for everything. So Deku's loving every second of the food that he gets, but after he gets his food and he has his tray in his hand, he wonders where he's gonna sit, and having flashbacks of memories of what his childhood was like, and people not wanting to be near him, and people kind of just treating him like an outcast most of his life, would cause a little bit of a frown to appear on his face as he would kind of put a brave face on and make his way towards an empty lunch table, thinking that it was just going to be more of that here anyway. So he sits down, and after he does so and starts eating and closes his eyes, feeling bad, he then has two people just sit down on the table with him as they slam their trays down. They're like, you're so lucky. We wish we could have been tutored by Momo. What was it like? What did she smell like? Mineta would ask. And Kaminari's like, yeah. Are they even bigger up close? As Deku, hearing that, would just realize that these two are class act perverts. But Izuku does feel something. He feels good. For the first time, people have actively chosen to come sit next to him. Obviously, Momo sat next to him and helped him because she was right next to him, but right here, these dudes aren't treating him like an outcast, and it feels nice. They have no reason to do it. It's not like they're making money or anything, so it's not like they're mutually helping each other. So Deku just smiles and he starts talking to them. He's like, hey, not about Momo, but we can talk about anything else. And they have like little conversation, and Deku's just surprised, like, these guys they're chill. They're perverts, but they're chill. And so lunch would pass, and Deku would find himself having two new friends, as right after this would take place, we would have them all going to their next classes, as finally they would end up having hero training course, to which nobody would actually be in the classroom. They'd be wondering what's going on when suddenly the door would burst open and it would be All Might saying, I am here, coming in like a normal person, as he goes on to introduce himself and then shows them their costumes, as the wall would turn and a bunch of briefcases are shown. Deku, seeing this, would realize that he had forgotten to even submit a costume. So for now, Deku was just going to be having to use his normal clothing for this little section of the story. And we would watch as everybody else comes out in their hero costumes, which are all going to be a bit different than the ones that we get in the original, just due to the fact that these characters are older. Some of their likes might be different. Some of their costume ideas might be different. So, some of the characters definitely will look different, but it kind of stays generally the same, the premise at least. That said, All Might would go on to explain that they're going to be taking place in 2v2 battles, and Deku hearing this would smile, knowing that this was something right up his alley and something that he doesn't have to struggle or lack behind everybody else in. And so, Deku would draw names hoping that he gets matched up with Momo as his teammate. And what would you know it? The luck of the draw would favor him. Deku would be paired up with Momo, and their opponent would be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. After this happens, Deku walks over to Momo and he would end up telling her that he's her partner. And Momo would say that's great, saying that she knows that he'll help out a ton. As, she's like, what should we do to catch the bomb? And Deku, he starts talking to her, they start game planning, and suddenly Deku could feel somebody have shoulder checked him. And obviously it would have been Bakugo, being the character that he is at this point. So Deku would glare at Bakugo, having, done that right in front of Momo, as he would think to himself that he's going to pay him back for that the second that the match starts. As Momo turns to him and says, don't worry about that, some guys are just jerks like that. With Deku being like, you're right, but what are we going to do to beat jerks like that? As Momo would, crack a smile, and Deku tells her that he loves her laugh. She starts blushing after hearing that, and Deku, realizing what he just said, would, kind of turn red a bit himself as they would make their way inside of the area. And about a couple of minutes later, as he and her are walking through the building, thinking of their game plan, and Momo pretty much says that she could create like a diversion or something, like a smoke bomb maybe, to get them in there easily. Deku acknowledges that that's an awesome idea, that he could, rush in there and they probably won't even see him coming, when suddenly you could hear explosions getting closer and closer. A big right hook would come flying in towards Deku's direction, and Deku would grab Bakugo's hand as he would smash him into the ground, causing Bakugo to ricochet into the air, grabbing him by his head as he would proceed to smash his face into the wall itself and then kick him away into the hallway. Bakugo, having been ragdolled like never before, would get absolutely pissed. He would then shoot an explosion as he would get closer towards the direction of Deku and throw an explosion that would create a bit of a smoke screen. He would then split behind Deku, but Deku, not having been caught off guard by that dirty fighting tactic that Bakugo just used, would look straight at Bakugo in the air, who would redirect himself and gain some space from Deku. From here, Bakugo would go on to say, why don't you try these on for size? As he would shoot a bunch of AP shots at the direction of Deku, catching him off guard, as these would actually end up hitting him and causing a bit of damage, but it's nothing Deku couldn't tank, considering that he's had way worse in the ring. And as soon as the smoke would dissipate, Deku would be standing there practically unfazed, with his clothes having been the only thing that took the brunt of the damage, specifically his shirt. That said, Deku would get into a little bit of a weird boxer type stance, and he would rush in towards the direction of Bakugo, covering his face, as he would then go on to throw a 1-2 uppercut punch at Bakugo, sending him up into the air before then kicking him in his chest as he would practically cave it in, sending him crashing into the wall down the hallway. As Bakugo, having taken a massive amount of damage in just the last minute, would look up at Deku as holding one gauntlet up, he would say, "You damn bastard," as he would pull a pin and a large explosion would go through that entire hallway. Deku, realizing that this was coming and gonna hurt Momo, would grab Momo as he would put her behind him and hug her, taking the brunt of the explosion himself. Once the explosion would be over, Deku would have realized what he had just done and hugged her so closely, as Momo would be red in the face, and Deku would let her go as he's like, "I'm sorry." And Momo's like, "No, it's fine. Thank you for protecting me." Deku asks if she's okay, and she's like, "Are you?" Deku, seeing the explosion having actually have caused him some damage, would go on to just take off the shirt completely, as Momo would see his physique in full action. She would just immediately blush even harder. All the while, Bakugo was watching this whole thing go down, as he would just think, there's no way I put everything into that. And Deku turns, looking at Bakugo with the look of a killer in his eye. With Bakugo feeling so much fear in that moment, be like, stay away, but Deku comes in and proceeds to gut punch Bakugo out the building through the wall, as he would fall down 2 stories, crashing on the ground unconscious and ricocheting before his head turns to the side and just falls. Deku would then hear All Might tell him that he took it too far, as Deku, he's just like, he took it too far first, but he would apologize for that, and then, they would make their way to the bomb room. Once they would do so, Momo would create a little bit of a smoke bomb thing, as she would throw it into the room and both of them would lunge at the bomb. Ida, being the villain of course, would rush at the bomb trying to move it so that they couldn't get to it in time, but Deku, being much faster than Ida is, would actually grab the bomb as he would push the bomb closer to Momo, and Momo would place her hand on it. As the smoke would clear, you could clearly see that Deku and Momo would have taken control of the bomb, and Ida would just be standing there being like, I failed, you know what I mean? Like, oh, could I have lost, As All Might would say, hero team wins! And, obviously the both of them would end up passing this event. After this happens, Deku looks at Momo and he's like, we make a pretty good team. As Momo looks at him and says, I didn't really do much of anything. I might have created a smoke bomb, but even the bomb you helped me with. As he's like, no, I didn't. You touched it, right? Momo would say, I'm not dumb. You brought it closer to me. Deku, he would kind of just like hold the back of his head and he's like, you caught me. I guess you can't really blame a guy for trying to pay back a debt. I mean, you do help me a lot in class, so I figured the least I could do is help you out with hero training. So Momo, hearing that, would say, I guess, as she would smile, and Deku would say, anytime. After this, the event would end, and you would pretty much end up getting Momo go towards the direction of the girls that she's made friends with so far, as they're like, tell us how it was. What was it like being so close to him? He's so hot, like they're just going crazy because of his body. And then they're like, Mina is all like, how did his body feel? And Momo goes bright red. She's like, shut up, you know what I mean? And we would then pretty much get Deku making his way towards the direction of the guys, and they're just like, oh, you're so strong. Like, how in the world did you learn to fight like that? Deku, reminiscing on his time, in the illegal battles, would think about that and realize he probably shouldn't mention that, saying that he took a couple boxing classes back in the day, just kind of bluntly lying to everybody. As Deku would pretty much end up finishing the day, and he would of course be confronted by Aizawa, who would go on to tell Izuku that the next time he fights a classmate, he's gonna need to tone it down, saying that this time he'll let it slide because Bakugo was way out of line, but still, he injured him extremely badly after that fight, and if not for recovery, the injuries might have been fatal. Deku would go on to explain that he's sorry and that he'll definitely never take things too far next time, as Aizawa would say, you better not, as he would walk off. And after this would take place, about say 1 week or 2 weeks, give or take, would end up playing out as the students would all get much more accustomed to each other, and we would pan into a scene of all the students on their way to the USJ event. On their way there, everybody's all talking about like, oh, who's the strongest in the classroom? And meanwhile, you got Deku sitting in the back of the bus with Kaminari, Mineta, and Sato, or I put in parentheses, big lip dude. That's crazy. But yeah, no, Sato's in the back of the class with them, he's hanging out with them. And as they're doing this, like I said, everyone's like, oh, who's the strongest? With some people being like, oh, it's Todoroki. I mean, he has 2 quirks. And then others saying that it has to be Deku, saying that he's so strong he took out Bakugo, who they thought would have been one of the strongest. Bakugo, hearing that, would get mad at the fact that he got beat up by Deku so badly, and he would just glare at him, wanting to fight him again and get his revenge, but he'll have to wait for that. That said, Deku could not care less who's the strongest, considering that his goal isn't necessarily to be the strongest, but to just be a hero to prove his parents wrong. So, he doesn't really care, partake in the conversation too much, and eventually they end up arriving to the USJ, where 13 would end up giving her long, drawn-out speech. While she's talking, and she's all like, so yeah, remember guys, use your quirks safely because quirks can be dangerous. Deku just starts getting a really bad feeling in his gut, as out of nowhere, Deku would feel that he's inside of water, having been teleported away by none other than Kurigiri. That being the case, Deku would look around the water as he would realize that there's villains all around him, and coming to this realization, Deku would smirk, but then it would hit him. Momo. She must be in danger, because if he was able to be teleported to a different area where right now he's not even sure if he's still in the USJ because he's in the water, would get pissed. This man in the water, mind you, in these dudes' domain, because this is like their whole quirk specialty, would proceed to absolutely kick butt, whooping 20 plus bad guys with water quirks, as he would proceed to burst out of the water like a torpedo, having taken 0 breaths before that would have happened, and landing on top of the the boat as he would breathe in and look around to see Tsuyu and Mineta, with Tsuyu saying, "Sorry I didn't save you back there, but it looked like you were busy taking out the villains, Ribbit." And Deku hearing that would be like, "Don't worry about it," as he would look around and wonder where Momo was at. They would go on to ask him if he took out all the villains, and Deku would simply nod, as before they knew it, Deku was running on the water, making his way to go find wherever Momo was teleported to, noting that she wasn't near Pro Hero 13 and the rest of the students that weren't teleported away. Deku, seeing that, would blitz around, moving so fast that the man looked like an absolute blur, as out of nowhere, all the while Momo, Jiro, and Kaminari were being backed up into a corner by villains, Deku would land in front of them, looking like an absolute superhero, as Kaminari would say, "We're saved! With Deku here, there's no way these villains can touch us." Deku would smirk, not ruining his aura farming moment, as he would ask Momo if she could make him something to fight these guys with. She would go on to quickly make him some nunchucks, and Deku, taking them in his hand, would grab these red nunchucks as he starts like moving them with his body, similarly to what he would have used to defeat Dagon. By him, I mean Toji, as this dude would rush towards these villains and just bash their heads in, not killing them, but like, bro, absolutely murks them. It's bad what he ends up doing to them. After this happens, there would be a pile of bodies, and Deku would turn towards the direction of Momo and Jiro and Kaminari, as Kaminari, breaking the cool moment in half, or I guess ruining the moment is a better way to put it, would be like, "Hooray! Luckily Momo was here, and with her around, they basically had a guardian angel." As Deku, realizing that this man just said that out loud, would start blushing super hard. This man just starts losing a bunch of aura by the second, and then Deku looks at Kaminari going like, "Why'd you have to go and say that, huh?" As, Kaminari would be like, my bad. And, you would then see Momo turning to him and being like, "Thanks, is that really true? Did you come here just for me?" With Deku looking at her and being like, "I'd be lying if I said I didn't." From here, Jiro would ruin the moment, breaking the silence, as she would say, "Guys, there's still a lot more villains, And Deku, realizing this and noting that she's now safe, would turn to Kaminari as he would say, "You better protect her with your life, you got me?" As Kaminari would say, "You can leave the rest to me. Any villain that comes over here will feel sorry that they have to take 100 bolts to the face." As Deku, looking at him, would know that he's not going to let him down, and he would end up dipping out of there, making his way to go help Aizawa with all the villains that he was currently fighting. Deku at this point would end up arriving, as he would watch as Aizawa would struggle against Shigaraki, who would have been decaying his elbow just like he would have in the original. Izuku, seeing this happen, would end up pretty much kicking Shigaraki away, as Shigaraki would tumble on the ground, having taken the full brute force of that attack, and look up at Deku being pissed. He would then scream, "Attack him!" as a bunch of villains would end up arriving, and Deku, with Aizawa's help, would end up absolutely decimating, because not only was Aizawa there backing him, but the dudes that normally would have had quirks would be even more easy to take out because of the fact that they're fighting on an even playing field with Deku. So he would absolutely obliterate them, and after doing so, he would have a big cocky smile as he would say, "Is that all you got?" And Shigaraki would say, "Look behind ya," as the Nomu would be standing there shrieking as it would punch Deku square in the face, sending him crashing onto the floor, as it would send him tumbling just like he would have to Shigaraki. And he would get up, kind of slowly, as he would rub his cheeks, saying, "I actually felt that one. It reminded me of someone I fought back in the day." As he would then turn towards Aizawa and tell him that that thing was not a human, asking if he's allowed to go all out. Aizawa in this moment would proceed to nod, as Aizawa starts using his erasure quirk on the Nomu, and the Nomu would rush in at Deku screeching, with Deku landing a vicious kick to the Nomu's stomach, as his leg would actually go right through it, with Deku having underestimated the strength that he would have used for that kick. That said, he would think that the battle was over, but he wouldn't be able to pull his leg out, as the Nomu would shriek and then proceed to punch Deku, as he would hold out like a cross with his arm to take most of the attack, and he would be punched into the ground, with him cracking the floor. Deku, seeing this happen, would end up pulling his leg out with all of his strength, as he would see that the Nomu's wounds would begin to heal, since Aizawa would have ended up blinking. Deku, after this moment, would turn towards Aizawa as he would say, "Rest your eyes, Aizawa, I'll tell you when to use your quirk." As from this point, Deku would, pretty much get ready to give Aizawa a signal, as he proceeds to start running around the Nomu and then sweep kick the Nomu as it would, be caught off guard by Deku's, speed. It would start to slowly tumble and fall, and as it's mid-air, Deku would jump up, or not jump up, but he would pretty much end up landing a drop kick as he would lift his leg up and then slam it on the Nomu's ribs as it would end up breaking every single one of them before he would then jump into the air saying, "Now!" And he would drop an elbow straight on the skull of the Nomu as it would destroy its brain in its entirety, and he would look up at Shigaraki saying, "You're next." But before he could even capture Shigaraki or leave and land another blow on him, Shigaraki would have a portal appear in front of him as he would be teleported away. However, Deku, seeing this happen in slow motion, would have thrown his nunchucks at Shigaraki's face, or no, not face, but like body, as the nunchucks would have been thrown with such a force that they would actually end up stabbing into his shoulder, shocking Shigaraki, who wasn't expecting something like that from him, as Deku would have watched Shigaraki teleport away, and Shigaraki would feel like Deku was an absolute monster. From here, the heroes would end up cleaning up the situation, and Deku would obviously go to check on Momo, with Momo pretty much explaining that she's fine and asking Izuku how he is, saying that he looks a little roughed up. Deku would say that he's seen better days, as Momo would say that she's just glad that he's safe and there was no casualties. From this point, All Might would end up actually like asking Izuku, what the fight was like, what the villains were like, and asking him questions. And Deku would say that Aizawa knows about as much as he does as well, but he would go on to explain that some weird creature thing ended up fighting him and that he had to kill the thing, as he would point to the Nomu's body, and All Might, seeing that thing, would think that that thing must have been insanely strong. Deku would go on to turn to All Might and say, "Yeah, it was pretty strong, but all it really took was a good hit to the head to destroy its brain," as All Might, hearing that, would be like, "Well, clearly you're gonna be a more vicious hero," as Deku would start laughing after hearing All Might tell him that. And after this would take place, we would get about 2 weeks worth of the students having a break, considering that All Might and the heroes would have to give a press conference explaining why this happened, how it's never going to happen again, and yada yada yada. You guys get the point. All right, getting back into the story. Actually, wait, no, before I get back into the story, let me actually tell you guys something really quickly. I've been noticing a lot that a lot of you guys have not been getting notifications when I upload these videos. So in case you don't have your notifications on, or if you do have them on and they haven't been working, just turn them on, turn on all notifications, and just redo the whole process just to see if YouTube will hopefully fix itself or something like that. But if not, I mean, it is what it is. That said, yeah, I took a break last night from recording the video just because like a 2-hour recording is a bit too much for me to handle right now. So I broke it up from yesterday and today in the morning. So yeah, with that said, let's jump into the UA Sports Festival, specifically with everybody back in class after the events of the, what was it? The USJ, right? Yeah, the USJ. So as everyone would pretty much be in their classroom and they'd be having a normal day, towards the end of everything, like right before their lunch class or lunch period comes around, Aizawa would go on to inform the entire class about how they're going to be partaking in the UA Sports Festival and how this is going to be helping them out greatly in their future. So to take this as a really, really big deal. And all the while everyone's, having a blast, and Uraraka's like, "Try your best, try your," like she's freaking out, all fired up for the UA Sports Festival. And, everybody else is excited to show off their quirks. Todoroki's just excited to prove to his dad that he can be a hero with only his ice quirk or whatever. We pretty much have Deku with Momo, and, he's smiling, thinking about how cool it's going to be able to show everybody just how strong he is. And his parents will probably be watching this too, seeing as they're obsessed with making his sister a hero from what they remembered. She was actually born with a really incredible quirk, so she'll probably do that one day. And so Deku, would turn towards Momo's direction, and looking at her, he could see that she was kind of forcing like a bit of a fake smile. Deku would ask her what's wrong, and she says that honestly, she's just worried. She's worried she's not going to live up to what their standards are, saying that she doesn't want to let anyone down. And Izuku looks at her and says, "How could you let anyone down? I mean, your quirk is incredible, and you're one of the smartest people I know. I'm sure you'll do fine," Deku would say as he would chuckle. But Momo would just look at him and say, "Yeah, but what if we have to fight each other. Everyone knows I'm not exactly the best at hand-to-hand combat. And Deku hearing this would go, really? That's what you're worried about? You mean to tell me you have me sitting in front of you every day and you've never once thought of going, hey, let me ask him to train me up a bit? She would say, you'd really do that? And Deku turns to her being like, are you kidding me? You've been helping me in class pretty much every single day since I've started here, and you haven't gotten a single thing back. And Momo just goes, well, you did help me during the 2v2 battle. Deku just starts chuckling and would just tell her, you know, to pretty much meet him at Dagoma Beach tomorrow. And so the very next day in the morning, like 2 hours before UA class would begin, Deku and Momo would find themselves at this dusty, dirty beach as Deku would go on to pretty much toss her a bow staff, and she catching it would be like, what's this for? You know I could have made my own. And Deku just looks at her and says, yeah, you're probably gonna need to because these are gonna break. As he would essentially proceed to walk her through a vigorous workout. Like, this man proceeds to just absolutely destroy her. And by the end of the workout, she would have like, her body would pretty much just feel like day one in the gym when you're like so sore from all the exercises that you had done that your body just wasn't used to. So during, you know, their first day back in class, she's just exhausted, you know what I mean? And she's like super tired and she's just not feeling up to it. And Deku noticing that it definitely, you know, took a hit on her, you know, academic side of school, he would go on to pretty much tell her that maybe training before school wasn't the best choice, going on to say that he probably should have thought about doing it after class. Momo, you know, turning towards Deku would say, yeah, and she also has a better location. So Deku would pretty much end up making his way with Momo into her limo, as they would end up making their way towards Momo's like house, as it's like a big gigantic mansion. Deku's stunned by the amount of money she has, and she's like, how are you so rich? She's like, well, I'm not rich, my father is. And she'd be like, my father's, you know, the leader of Yaoyorozu, you know, company. And he's like, oh, I thought your name sounded familiar. As we pretty much end up getting Deku and Momo walking by a bunch of rooms. Like, there's a bunch of like butlers and stuff like that everywhere. There's chefs and like maids and stuff. And they finally make their way to like a big training facility where Momo actually would have a bunch of bow staffs that she created and a bunch of like different weapons and gym equipment and stuff like that. Deku turns to Momo and says, so you have your own little training facility. Neat. As he grabs a bow staff and starts pretty much like messing with it, you know, looking really cool. Izuku goes on to explain to her that for the following next 5 or 6 days, he's going to be sparring with her and telling her that the best way for her to learn is to essentially be thrown into the fire, saying that if she can handle going into combat with him, then she'll be able to handle everything. So she, you know, would kind of like resolve herself, and she tells Izuku not to take things easy on her. And so that's exactly what dude would do. Like, obviously he does take it easy on her in the sense that, you know, he likes her and she's a girl, but he wouldn't take it easy on her in the sense that like he's babying her, right? Because he's going hard enough that she's learning and, you know, getting better as every single day progresses. Not exactly going all out, because then he'd literally kill her. But yeah, she eventually gets a lot better at using a bow staff and fighting at close range, and Izuku would even teach her a bunch of dirty tactics, as Momo, after, you know, their final day of training, would be absolutely wasted. She's just tired and exhausted, and she even has a bunch of bruises that Deku would have given her from this training, because it was not easy. This dude is whipping her into shape, might I add. But with that being the case, Momo would ask Deku how he got so strong, saying that at such a young age nobody should be able to have this much skill in combat. And Izuku, turning towards her, would essentially say that, you know, he's not really too proud about talking about why he's this strong. Momo would be like, well, you can tell me anything, I promise I won't judge you. So Deku kind of just like looks up towards the ceiling and would be like, you promise? And she looks at him and she's just like, of course. Deku, you know, he kind of just sighs, and then he looks towards the ground as he says, before I was in the school, I actually had to fight in underground, you know, fights to make money and get by. I was an orphan all my life until I was 18, and then they kicked me out, and I had nowhere to go. A broker came by, he offered me a job, and I couldn't resist the free money, the apartment, or the food. And when I tried getting a normal job, everyone just denied me, saying that I was a bum. I mean, I don't blame them, you know. I did walk in with raggedy clothes, and my hair was all scruffed up. I hadn't had a haircut in what felt like months at that point. So Momo, hearing this story, would be like, so you must have had it really hard back then. As Izuku says, Well, you have no idea. As Momo turning towards him would say, well, you don't have to worry about any of that, because if this hero thing doesn't work out, I could always hire you as my personal trainer. As, Deku looks at her and cracks a smile going, oh yeah? And she just, like hits him with the bow staff, or at least tries to. Deku just is like, you should aim lower, and blocks it, as Momo's like, I can't even catch you off guard. And after this would happen, we would have like a bit of a flash forward moment where Izuku would essentially be told that not only is he going to partake in the UA festival, but he's actually going to be somebody who's going to be giving a speech. So Deku would do his best to try to give a cool little speech moment, but honestly it's just really awkward, and the dude ends up making an utter fool of himself. So he walks back towards the rest of the participants. Kaminari and Mineta just look at him, they're like, yo, it was lame. Sato, he's just like, oh, don't worry about it. Midoriya, like, you did great, and or Fushiguro technically is what he would say, as Deku just nods at them. Momo from this point would look at Izuku and thank him for all his training, saying that she feels confident now, going on to pretty much ask Deku not to help her out during these exams. Izuku looking at her would say, all right, I won't. And so the first event would start, which would be the race that everyone has in the original, with Deku using his insanely superior speed thanks to his heavenly restriction, as well as his skills, to just run by the robots without even having to, do anything about them. The man proceeds to jump effortlessly through the section where you could have a really bad fall if you miss your jump, and with the landmines, Deku runs so fast that the explosions go off after he would already be 10 steps ahead. So those mines wouldn't do a thing to Izuku, and when it comes to every other obstacle that would be around, they would be absolutely child's play for him, leading him to get the 10 million point headband, and leading us to the next event, which is not the cavalry battle because I don't really like it, and instead we're going to be swapping that out for a battle royale to thin out the competition. Groups of 4 would be assigned, and 4 different sets of battle royales would go on, as Deku wouldn't be with the same one as Todoroki, Shinszo, or Bakugo. Luckily for him, they're all in a different section. So Deku ends up passing the battle royale by absolutely, toying with his opponents, considering that this is the world that Deku comes from. This is just child's play for him. And people watch as Deku, using nothing but seemingly his physical strength, would proceed to manhandle all the competition. These powerful quirk users look like nothing but boys in his presence, and everyone is honestly starting to take a huge liking towards Izuku. After this would happen, the 1v1 battles would start, and I can see the bracket being exactly the same as in the original, meaning that Deku's first opponent is going to be Shinszo. And before I actually started recording this video, I thought, oh dang, Deku's probably going to lose to Shinszo because of the mind control, but then I remembered that one part of the story where Toji literally resists mind control itself, and I thought, it'd be so much cooler if we basically had Deku resist Shinso's mind control even after talking to him and, being caught off by his quirk. So here's how I see things going down. Deku steps into the ring, and Shinszo just kind of standing there, with a little bit of a cocky look on his face, as, right before the event would actually begin, Shinszo would look at Deku and say, it must be great to have such a powerful quirk to help you get by so easily during the rest of this exams. As, Deku hearing that, normally he doesn't talk back when someone's trash talking him, but he wanted to set the record straight, so he's like, I'm not. But before he could even finish that sentence, the dude would be under Shinso's mind control, and Shinszo smirking would say, step off the ring, as Izuku would actually turn, but not exactly move. Izuku's willpower was just so strong that Shinszo could not actually cause him to follow his command, and Deku, turning back towards Shinszo, would speed blitz him, as he would proceed to kick Shinszo in the chest, sending him flying off of the arena and crashing into the dirt, as Shinso's mind control would completely backfire on Shinszo, and Deku would simply just look at him on the ground, as he would go on to tell Shinszo that he's quirkless, with Shinszo being absolutely shocked. That said, after this first event would take place, Deku would make his way to the stands as he would watch Momo take on her first opponent, which would obviously be Tokiyami. And if you guys have seen the first version that happens in the UA Sports Festival, you'd see that the original Momo was actually doing pretty decent against this version of Tokiyami. So with the extra added training that she ends up getting from Izuku, I can see her performing so much better, in fact, that she actually ends up winning. So the both of them would advance to the second round, where Deku would now have to face is Todoroki. And you already know how Momo was gonna get down. She would cheer on Izuku, telling him to go whip his butt. As, Deku smirks and says he plans to do just that. And the man would get in the ring as the match would begin, and Todoroki would start the match by instantly shooting an iceberg at Deku. Deku, not having expected him to just try that off rip, would be stuck inside of the ice, as Momo watching this would be like, no, Deku! And people in the crowd would be like, oh, well, the people in the crowd would look disappointed, thinking that the match was going to be so much more interesting, and then you just got Present Mike going, well, it looks like another quick victory for Todoroki, before the ice would start shaking, and suddenly it would shatter as Deku would look at the direction of Todoroki smirking, with Todoroki kind of, grimacing and shooting more ice at him, but this time, Deku would proceed to just start punching the ice so fast that even though it was coming at him, he was literally just shredding through it as if it was nothing standing in his way, and he would walk closer and closer and closer as he's just hitting the ice, causing himself to get closer and close the distance between himself and Todoroki. He would eventually get so close that Todoroki, out of pure instinct, would end up shooting a beam of fire at Deku, which Deku would instantly tank, not caring about the flames, as he proceeds to just ragdoll Todoroki and show him that his quirks are pretty much nothing in the face of pure muscles, as Todoroki would be absolutely stunned, getting knocked out of the ring, and Deku would walk over towards Momo as he would pretty much promise to meet her in the final so long as she can make it. Momo would say she's gonna make it, and when she gets there, she's gonna show the world that her training has actually meant something, and she's finally gonna beat him. Deku would chuckle, saying, we'll see, and then he would then watch her, fight her next match as she ends up whooping the floor with Mina, who, using her acid quirk, wasn't able to get the best of Momo, as finally Deku would now have his next match and he would go be matched up with Ida. Deku would make this an absolute wash, being much faster than Ida, so his whole little shtick was already taken out from under him, and Ida just stood absolutely no choice, being whooped by Deku. As on the other side of things, we would get Momo actually being the one who gets the floor wiped with her, as Bakugo, not holding anything back and pretty much trying to shtick it to Deku, would beat her up worse than he had to, considering the fact that he doesn't like Deku. And if he can hurt him even a little bit by beating Momo up worse than he should, he's gonna take that chance. Especially after Deku ended up embarrassing him in the 2v2 battles in front of Momo. So he ends up taking her to the hospital, or not the hospital, but the nurse, and Recovery Girl heals her as best as she can, which leads her to being okay, but still, she had no reason to get hurt that badly. Like, this is the UA festival, not the UA massacre, right? And Deku, making his way towards the nurse's office, would end up telling Momo that he's gonna end up wiping the floor with Bakugo for that performance out there. Momo telling him to go do just that, and Deku would walk out of the room as he would smirk, and Momo would tell him to go win it all. Deku, after hearing that, would promise that he's gonna do just that, and we would then get the battle between Deku and Bakugo. Both contestants would make their way onto the ring, as Deku would say that was a pretty bad beating you gave Momo back there, as Bakugo would cut him off, saying, yeah, and what of it? She deserved it. She knew what she was getting into when she stepped in the ring. I wasn't gonna hold back against her or you. So you better not do the same, you hero wannabe. You're quirkless, and at the end of the day, in this open space, there's no way you're gonna be beating me this time, you damn nerd. As he would then go on to pretty much blast up with his explosions, flying into the air immediately, as he would say, just try and hit me, you quirkless bastard. With the crowd hearing him scream that so loud, people would be like, what? He's quirkless? He's quirkless? And suddenly, Present Mike would be like, yeah, as you just heard, Izuku Midoriya is 100% quirkless. We've done countless studies on him and have found that his physical strength really does come from nothing but pure training and talent. Hard work really can make you more than a hero nowadays. So all of you watching at home, just know, being quirkless won't stop your dreams, as he would, get everybody hype. And as he says this, you would pretty much zoom in on a family watching the UA Sports Festival, as it would be Inko and Iyashi. with, you know, Deku's sister, who's not so little anymore, seeing as she's 2 years younger than Izuku, and so she's 16, right? And she's watching Deku, you know, go crazy in the sports festival, you know, fighting all these people. She's just like, that's him, that's Izuku. The parents are just pissed. They're like, what? No, that can't be, you know, like they were thinking he was gonna wind up a nobody. And as she's watching this, she has a big bright smile on her face, glad that her brother's doing okay, wishing that what happened when he was a kid had never happened. Because at the end of the day, yes, she always outshined Deku, and Deku was jealous of her about that, but it's not like she hated him or meant to. She just wanted to, you know, show off and show that she could, you know, impress her parents. She at this point has already kind of understood how her parents really feel about her, so even though they're nice to her, she doesn't really like them, because she knows at the end of the day, they just want to use her for her quirk. So, you know, she's watching and she's having a big bright smile, all the while Deku is getting bombarded by a bunch of AP shots, similar to what Vegeta does to villains, where he's just like, like shooting a bunch of ki blasts. That's the picture that you guys could paint in your head as to how this battle's going down. And as that's happening, Deku would be at the bottom of the ring as smoke would start rising up to where Bakugo can't even see what's going on, and he just keeps pouring on the explosions, saying, all these explosions, you won't be able to dodge them all, so die! He would scream as more explosions would come flying in at Deku, and Deku would dodge each and every single one, with a bunch of rubble starting to pile up on the ring, considering that explosions are literally hitting it. So Deku, using all the rubble, would start gathering it as he would throw it up into the air and throw a bunch of rocks and like rubble at the direction of Bakugo, similarly to what Uraraka was actually trying to do when she fought against Bakugo. This would catch Bakugo off guard as he would dodge as much as he can, but he would ultimately get hit by some of the rubble, and he would, you know, yell back down saying, that's your strategy? It's gonna take a hell of a lot more than rubble to take me out. As suddenly you would just see Deku's like shirt that he would be wearing for the entrance for the UA exam, or sorry, sports festival, flying at Bakugo, as Bakugo's like, I gotcha, shooting his full powered explosion at that thing. But Deku, appearing from behind him, having used that as a misdirection, would say, I know that's not enough, and boom, he would hit this man with both of his hands, clobbering him at the top of his head, sending him crashing into the arena, as Bakugo would be fully unconscious from that one blow, which, mind you, he did not hold back on. So Bakugo's gonna be needing a recovery girl kiss ASAP before he ends up being fully, like, excuse me for my language, but straight up retarded, you know? So with that said, Deku would pretty much end up raising an arm up as the smoke would finally clear, and everyone would see an unconscious Bakugo and a valiant, standing strong and tall Deku without a shirt. Everybody starts taking pictures of the new, you know, winner of the UA festival, and people start hyping him up, going that he's gonna be the greatest hero. You know, I can't believe he's quirkless, like he's so strong. Girls all over the world are going crazy for him because, you know, obviously the man's aura farming at this point. And after all this would happen, Deku would pretty much end up making his way towards the podium, where he, Katsuki Bakugo, and Momo Yaoyorozu would all be standing there. As All Might, walking towards each and every single one of them, would start handing them all medals, being like, today you showed hard out there, young Yaoyorozu. And then Bakugo, he's like, you did a great job out there, Katsuki. You know, Bakugo's mad. He's like, whatever, I'll win next time. You know, he's like barking at Deku, saying, I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna kill you. And then you would have Deku getting the gold medal handed to him as he'd be at the top of the podium, and All Might would hand him a microphone saying, anything you want to say to the public? As Deku, standing tall with his medal, he would grab it as he looks down on it, and remembering every single thing that's led him to this moment, would just have a huge grin on his face as he would take the mic and just be like, how's this for a quirkless loser, mom and dad, knowing that they were watching this. And the second that they heard that, they would just get pissed. Like, the dad straight up throws the remote at the TV, cracking it, and the sister just starts laughing, saying, I'm glad you're doing good, Izuku. As, you know, they're just losing it, they're livid, they're like, why would we give him away? And the mom's like, he was quirkless, I didn't expect him to be that strong. And he's like, yeah, well, we knew that he was strong as a kid, why in the world would we do that? And they're just mad at each other, they're just beating themselves up over the fact that they didn't believe in Deku. And now they're not going to be able to get any of the spoils of Izuku, considering that he's 18 and they have zero legal claim to him. So they're just watching this man just achieve everything that they want their daughter to achieve, telling her that she better show more promise than him, and that when she grows up, she's gonna wipe the floor with him, saying that, you know, they put all their trust into her, and that she needs to pay them back for all that 100%. And, you know, the daughter just looks at them and she's like, yeah, you guys give me this speech once a week. I promise I won't let you down. But I can't exactly say I'm gonna match up to my older brother. Did you guys not see that? He wiped the floor with somebody who already had a fire quirk, and that's the only thing I have. As, you know, they look at her and they're just like, whatever, we'll just become a hero and don't be a disappointment like your brother. As, you know, we pan back to Izuku and everybody else and all the students, and Aizawa would be explaining to them that today they're finally gonna be picking their hero names. As, you know, Deku would end up picking the hero name Toji Fushiguro, just because I really couldn't think of any other cool name to give him, so I figured give homage to the character we're basing the whole thing off of. And in terms of who he's actually gonna go for his internship, in this specific timeline, I'm actually thinking that a perfect place to go for him would actually be the rabbit hero, Mirko, considering her fiery personality, the way she fights, and her watching Deku participate in the UA festival, definitely would have wanted her to fight him and just train him up and see if there's anything that she can show him, you know? So Deku would easily accept that internship. You know, he goes on to ask Momo, what are you gonna do? And she tells him that she's gonna go with Ryuk, the dragon hero. So Deku, hearing that Momo's pretty set up, would smile at her, as the both of them would end up texting throughout the course of their internships. And the main focus of Izuku's internship with Mirko would essentially boil down to him sparring with her showing him around the ropes, and him actually going on pro hero patrols with her actually letting Deku take out some bad guys and stuff like that. Eventually, I could see Mirko confessing to Deku that back in the day she also used to take part in underground fights when she was younger, saying that she had a drive for fights and she couldn't quench it, so she ended up going into that, and one thing or another she ended up becoming a hero. She goes on to explain that she might have become a villain if it wasn't for, you know, a certain character who ends up, you know, changing her life and her life entirely. And Deku, hearing that from the pro hero Mirko, would smile, knowing that his past is not gonna hold him back if it didn't hold Mirko back from becoming a top 5 hero, or I think it was 10. But regardless, Deku, you know, hearing this from Mirko would smile, and they end up having a great internship. Deku spars with her, he learns a couple new moves that he didn't use before, more kicks, you know, more ways to propel himself with his legs, considering that's how she fights, and he would have kicked her butt a bunch of times. Yes, Mirko's strong, but Deku, he is much stronger. And so we would essentially end up getting everybody returning from their hero internships being greeted to possibly the worst news that they could have gotten in this section of the story, because it would be revealed to them all that Ida was dead. He ended up falling to the hero killer trying to get revenge for his brother Tensei. And everybody hearing this news would immediately turn to look at where Ida usually sits at, as, bro, a huge sadness and just silence would fall over the room as everybody just realizes that he's dead. Their friend is dead. And even the people that didn't like him, you know, as the Clash rep, he was so annoying and everything always had to be so with him. Even they like started missing things that UA just wouldn't feel the same. And for the next week, there'd be like a somber mood anytime that, you know, somebody would like mention Ida, or somebody would be like, yeah, Ida would have done a great job at this, you know. Everyone's just sad, right? Like they're all upset that their good buddy Ida got killed. And with that being the case, Deku was pissed because he knows for sure with the news of Stain having joined the League of Villains actually in this timeline, not having died or been captured by the police, we would end up pretty much getting Deku, you know, being pissed at the League of Villains and knowing that the next time that he sees them, he's gonna get revenge back in blood. So someone's gonna lose their life. That said, after this part of the story would finally come around, we would get the final exam section of the story, and I'm not gonna bore you guys with the details of the written exam. Just know that Deku and Momo would definitely study together all the time, just because she's become somewhat of a tutor for him, and in turn he trains her up as much as he possibly can whenever they get any free time or she's available or whatever. That said, Deku would end up taking his final section of the final exam, and his would pretty much be consistent of being teammates with Bakugo and facing off against All Might. And Momo's would be basically consisting of her and Todoroki facing off against Aizawa, a hero who in essence would normally give her problems, but because of the training that that she's been receiving from Izuku, her hand-to-hand combat prowess has gone up through the roof, and her confidence and also thinking skills have just gone crazy. She's starting to think of new, darker tactics that usually she might not have used, and so the tactics she would develop to face off against Aizawa would essentially be using tear gas. She ends up studying the molecules and the makeup of it, and once their battle would finally come around, using her tear gas that she would use with her creation quirk, she would throw it in the area as Aizawa would be forced to blink, not being able to keep his eyes open for the entirety of the time. As she gets in up close and taking advantage of the fact that Aizawa was literally blind, would proceed to 1-2 hit him with her bow staff, stunning Aizawa, who would use his scarf to actually grab onto her bow staff and nearly jerk it away from her. Suddenly, Momo would say, "Now!" as suddenly a burst of ice would come shooting towards Aizawa, freezing him in place, with Momo and Todoroki escaping, winning this and passing this section of the test. Deku would be extremely proud of her, but seeing her section finally be over, Deku would turn, acknowledging that now the hard stuff's gonna happen for him. He would watch as Bakugo, obviously not willing to work with him considering that he considers him an enemy, would go in guns blazing trying to face off against All Might, and Deku, not having that view of Kacchan of being his childhood best friend, genuinely could not care any less whether he gets beaten to a pulp by All Might or not. So that's exactly what happens. Bakugo poses a little bit more of a threat to All Might than he does in the original, landing maybe 1 or 2 more hits, considering that he's older, so he's a lot stronger, but still, it doesn't really end up amounting to much, and Bakugo still ends up getting the floor wiped with him, all thanks to All Might. That said, we would then get a scene in which All Might would finish clobbering Bakugo with him being completely unconscious, as Deku would step out of a random building and clap it up for All Might, telling him that he's impressed that Bakugo's pretty strong, and even for his old age, he's out here handling him like he's nothing. All Might, hearing this, would say, "So, young man, you've decided to face me alone. Brave, but stupid," as he would rush in throwing a punch at Deku, and Deku would counter it with a punch of his own. Both fists would clash, colliding with each other, and the wind would actually pick up, causing it to rain in the area. As this would happen, Deku and All Might would smirk as Izuku tells All Might to take those wrist weights off, that they're going to be holding him back a lot during this fight. As All Might, hearing that, would ask him if he's sure about that, and Izuku would say that if he won't do it, he'll do it himself, blitzing by All Might and proceeding to land a punch straight to one of All Might's wrists, breaking one of the shackles that he was using to pretty much hold him back, the 500-pound wrist bracelet that he had on, as All Might, looking at Deku would smirk, saying very well, snapping off the other ones and even the ankle weights that he was wearing, as he would say, "Remember, young man, you asked for it," and using his full strength, he would blitz in towards Deku's direction, throwing a punch which Deku would easily dodge using some of his boxing techniques that he's learned over the years, before throwing a 1-2 combo at All Might, causing him to back up slightly as his head would be knocked backwards, and Deku would then spin kick as he would throw a kick straight to All Might's face, sending him crashing into a building. With people who are watching this take place would be like, "What? He's strong enough to go toe to toe with All Might himself? I mean, I knew it was strong, but not that strong." As they're all freaking out at the fact that All Might is literally being manhandled by an 18-year-old with no quirk. People watching this, mainly the boys, would start calling bogus on his quirkless status, saying that whatever those doctors are on, they want some, because there's no way in any world that a quirkless person should be able to keep up with All Might and manhandle him the way that this dude's doing to him. All Might does his absolute best to keep up with Deku, but All Might's fighting style just is not going to be working with somebody like Deku, who at this point is stronger than All Might, is faster than All Might, and has better combat experience than All Might. So he wipes the floor with All Might, and the camera's cut, not revealing who the true winner of this event was. Finally, we would then see Deku walking into the room, pretty much looking like he received nothing but maybe 2 punches, and everybody would ask who won, with Deku saying that he did. The cameras broke at the final moment, but they didn't really break. He just straight up beat All Might out of his, buff form. He literally beat the buff off of him, right? And Yue, hiding the secret, wasn't obviously going to be showing him that. So with that being the case, All Might, his secret is kept safe or whatever, and the heroes would pretty much end up telling them that they're going to be going on a little bit of a forest training camp. So with that being the case, Deku would finally have enough resolve on this particular day to go up to Momo after class would be over and ask her if she's down to go celebrate later. She would be like, what do you mean celebrate? Are we gonna go train or something? Is that your idea of a celebration? And Deku just kind of looks at her and he's like, no, I meant I'll take you out. And Momo hearing that would be like, what, like a date? As Deku says, I mean, you could call it that, or maybe two friends hanging out, whatever you want, as long as we're together. As Momo, you know, she blushes a little bit and she's like, well, yeah, I'd love that. As you know, both of them pretty much right after class would end would just grab their things and make their way to go eat at some fast food parlor where they end up grabbing some nuggets and fries and stuff like that. And right after that would be over, they would make their way towards a park where they're just talking and literally having a blast. Like if this was animated, it's pretty much just Buff Deku and Momo just like flirting it up every now and then, cracking some jokes and having an awesome time until eventually it hits nighttime and Deku ends up offering Momo to get on a boat with him. Picture like that Tangled scene where they end up singing to each other and like he, you know, brings her the lantern that starts floating up into the air minus the singing. That's what ends up taking place over the course of their date. And you know, at the end of it, before Deku drops her off at her house, he ends up pretty much asking her out officially. As you know, Momo obviously says yes, having gotten this close to Deku over this time, and you know, they're old enough to, you know, do whatever they want. So she says yes, and Deku ends up getting his, you know, his first kiss from Momo. They had a blast or whatever, and the dude just kind of like walks away. He's like, woohoo, you know what I mean? Like that stereotypical. Have you guys seen Sky High? If you have, then Will Armstrong or Will something strong, like when he ends up getting the girl to like give him a kiss and drop her off at home, he like gets so excited he jumps on a lamppost and like breaks it dang near. That's what would essentially end up taking place after that, as we would then, you know, jump cut to all the students being on the bus heading towards the forest training camp with Deku and Momo sitting next to each other and actually being in the back holding hands. All the girls in UA are like, ooh, you guys are dating, you know. Obviously, you know, they're trying to poke fun at them, but not too crazy because they are 18, so you know, they're older, you know, they're not that immature. And with that being the case, you know, Deku and Momo are just back there doing their thing, you know, they're talking it up until finally they would be dropped off on the top of a hill where they end up onlooking that about the training camp that they're supposed to be at and realize that it's still really far. As the students all almost immediately understand what's going on, they would be thrown over the hilltop by Mandalay, as all of them would be told that for now they were gonna have to be fighting through all of these random Pixie Bob monsters on their way to the training camp, saying good luck and not to be too late, considering that if they are, the food's gonna get cold. So class 1A would go through facing off against all of Pixie Bob's little monster creations, and then we would get a pretty normal training camp arc until obviously the Vanguard Action Squad would end up arriving. But when this happens, unlike in the original, the fights that Deku would take place in would be a lot different. Number one, Deku versus Muscular is going to be changing a lot. Number two, Deku versus Stain is going to be happening, of course, because, bro, he literally is the reason that Ida's dead. Deku versus not only Stain, but Stain, Spinner, and Magma. So he's going to be fighting a 3v1. And then after that, he's also going to be, you know, chasing after Mr. Compress, who obviously ends up kidnapping Bakugo and also Tokiyami. But I digress. First, let's start with Deku versus Muscular. Kid, get out of here. You're not going to want to see this, Deku would say to Koda, who was watching this whole thing play out as a massive behemoth of a man would step forward, taking a cloak off, revealing himself to be Muscular. Koda, realizing that this is the man who killed his parents, would be terrified in fear and wouldn't be able to listen to Deku, who would have just told him to leave. Deku, noting this, would grab onto the kid as he would, you know, pretty much help him dodge the blow that Muscular would have thrown at him, as he would throw him to the side and tell him to just watch this if he's not going to leave. Muscular, standing in front of Deku, would crack his knuckles as he would say, "So you're a brawler, kid. This is gonna be fun," throwing a punch towards the direction of Deku, which Deku would actually catch with his hand and stun Muscular, who's like, "What? In a contest of strength, I'm losing?" Deku would proceed to crush his hand, as obviously, you know, Muscular has a bunch of muscles, but there's only so many you have in your hand, so that's not exactly helping Muscular in this situation, and he would break his hand, with Muscular being stunned at the strength that this kid kid's displaying. After this, Deku would proceed to just grab his nunchucks that Momo would have made for him while he was here and proceed to use them to beat the brakes off of Muscular, hitting him in multiple spots where the muscle tendons were weak, knowing the anatomy of the body to a T, seeing as Momo would have actually helped him study for one of their anatomy exams. So Deku would have used that newfound knowledge to just beat the brakes off of Muscular, causing his muscles to spasm out and begin cramping, as he would end up slamming Muscular's head into the mountainside and leaving him as he would be completely passed out, practically left for dead. Obviously he's not dead, but he might as well be. The dude's officially going to be brain dead after this fight. But with that being the case, Deku would then grab onto Koda, quickly rushing to where the direction of the heroes are at and dropping him off as he would rush into the forest, knowing that there's more League of Villains villains out there, and wanting to get his revenge. He would hope that that hero killer was present as well. Rushing throughout the forest, he would eventually hear the screams of Tiger, or more specifically Mandalay, who would have been taken out by Stain, Spinner, and Magna. Deku arriving would see that Tiger was standing right next to them, trying his best to hold them off, and Deku, walking forward would pretty much end up telling him that his fight's done. He would speed blitz towards the direction of Magma, who uses this gun thing or whatever it is that he uses, as he would elbow him square in the chest, causing him to just lose control of his breathing. He's just like he can't breathe. He's gasping for air, doing his best to grab onto something, but it's just not working. And Deku, following this, would grab his blade as he would turn towards Spinner, going to strike him, but Stain, being the master, knife combatant, would actually end up countering this and pushing Deku back, as Deku, being pushed back even slightly, would say, "I can see why Ida died against you," before then rushing in towards Stain and using such speed that Stain even himself couldn't keep up with it. Spinner would try his best to get in the way, but this would only cause Spinner to end up being absolutely decimated by Deku, as he would not only stab Stain, taking him out of commission, but he would also do the same to Spinner, causing him to be completely rendered useless for the remainder of the battle. As Deku in this following moment would say, "I won't kill you because I'm a hero, but I will make sure you never hurt anyone again," as he proceeds to just straight up cut off Stain's fingers. Like, they can't grow back anymore. The dude's cooked, right? And he just pretty much ends up leaving Stain there bleeding out as he rushes into the forest searching for his classmates, luckily arriving just in time before Uraraka and Toga were gonna face off against... Wait, I was actually saying that wrong. No, Uraraka and Tsuyu were gonna face off against Toga. He would arrive, quickly taking her out, with that being nothing but child's play, and then Uraraka would say, "What? When did you get here?" As Izuku would say that he came to help, with Tsuyu being like, "Ribbit, I'm surprised you're not helping Momo." Izuku, hearing that, would think to himself that she'll be fine, that none of these villains out here are going to be enough to be killing her at this point, as he has more than enough faith in her own abilities to protect herself, knowing that if it really comes down to it, she'll pull through. And so he would go forth searching for the rest of his classmates, as he would see Tokiyami and the Dupli Arm guy helping them out with their situation, as eventually the moment would finally come where Bakugo and Tokiyami would be kidnapped by the villains. They would try to escape, but unlike in the original where Deku was too little too late, that would be completely flipped on its head. Deku would be the only character fast enough to jump in the portal with the villains, and he would land in front of the bar, in front of every single one of them. Well, technically most, considering it's only going to be Kurogiri, Shigaraki, twice, Mr. Compress, and Dabi. No Toga, no Spinner, no Stain, and no Magna. So yeah, Deku, standing in front of all of these opponents that are before him, would rush towards the direction of Shigaraki, knowing that if he takes out the leader, he takes out the main guy. But before he could do that, a wall of flames would prevent him from doing so, as it would be Dabi, with these flames actually causing Deku to wince from pain a little bit. Deku, jumping backwards, would realize that this is not exactly a battle that's in his best interest, and so Deku would proceed to kick one of the chairs towards the direction of the villains, as he scatters all the objects that are present nearby, and proceeds to take out a smoke bomb that Momo would have created for him a long time, with him in his head thinking, "Thanks, Momo." He would drop it as the smoke screen would appear, and Deku would proceed to, in the midst of the 15-second runtime that this bomb has, just absolutely smack each and every single one of these villains. using his blade to slash at Shigaraki's chest, rendering him completely useless, before then jumping towards the direction of Dabi as he would be, he would bump into one of Twice's clones. Deku would kill the thing, not even caring about, who's in front of him or anything, as, the clone would turn into nothing but mush, before then, blitzing towards Dabi and pretty much hitting him with the hilt of his blade right at his throat, causing Dabi to just lose oxygen and pass out completely. He then jumps over towards Mr. Compress, who, not being able to actually see Izuku, would be caught off guard and would be punched square in the face, sent crashing into the brick wall behind him. After this, Deku would pretty much would realize that there's a bunch of people in this area, before then slashing through each and every single one of the Twice clones that he would have created by simply panicking, and Twice would then be, the last one left, as he'd be like, "Don't touch me, wait, no, I'll beat you," you know what I mean, like, having his multiple personalities go crazy. As the final one left would be Kurogiri, and Deku, blitzing towards the direction of him, having figured his weakness out from the last time he encountered him, would actually grab onto his metal part, the only weak part of Kurogiri's body, as he would hold him down and tell him that this little organization of theirs was done for. As he would stand tall, having taken out the entirety of the League of Villains by himself. Thinking that it was all over, he then goes over towards two orbs that were on the ground, releasing Tokiyami and Bakugo, with both of them being like, "What took you so long?" Or more specifically Bakugo, because he's the only one that I could actually see saying that. Tokiyami would actually thank Deku, being a decent human being, but as this is happening, black goo would appear out of nowhere, as All For One would teleport there instantly, having heard everything that was going on through that TV that the League of Villains have, that is like the purple and black TV. But I digress. Deku would now stand face to face with the greatest villain in the entire show, and once he takes him out, everyone else is essentially going to be child's play. Deku would smirk, grabbing onto his blade, as Bakugo, who was now here, would go rushing in towards the direction of All For One, thinking, "Oh, so this is the big bad," as, All For One, having no second thoughts about this, would proceed to use a dark energy ball, which would go flying towards Bakugo at such speeds that it just blew up in his face, sending him crashing onto the ground, with Tokiyami using his darkness quirk to essentially rush at the direction of All For One, but All For One, using a flame quirk, would proceed to just absolutely render the dude useless. As Deku, seeing this display, would realize that this guy has multiple quirks. Izuku would smirk, thinking that it's ironic. The guy with no quirks now has to go up against somebody who has seemingly any quirk known to man. Deku would rush in with his blade, trying to kill him, realizing that this is somebody he can't let survive. He can't let this guy leave here alive. But before the blade could make contact, it would stop just short, as a barrier would have been created in front of him, and Deku would realize that he had broken through 5 different barriers, but the 6th one and final one was the only one that could hold up. After that, a huge burst of air would hit him, as All For One would use his quirk Air Cannon, sending him flying back, as a bunch of rubble would then come flying in towards the direction of Deku, with him dodging each and every single one of them. Deku would get into a fighting stance similar to what Mirko does, looking very animalistic, having learned the way that she fights, as he would rush in towards the direction of All For One, but him, being the villain that he is, would just stand there as he would create a bunch of barriers once more, with Deku realizing that he can't get close, as a beam of air would come flying towards him, or no, not air, but like a beam of like darkness, that those little tendrils that he can shoot out, that would come flying towards his direction, with Deku dodging it and then using his blade to actually cut it. Deku, realizing that he's going to be needing to use some sort of distraction, would run around the room, as All For One, realizing what he's trying to do and noting that fighting him out in the open would probably be better, would proceed to combine a bunch of quirks, as a massive explosion would go throughout the area, clearing the place just like it would have for his fight against All Might. Deku, having not much to work with at this point, would realize that he's gonna have to just brute force his way into this. And so, Deku would try again and again to get closer to All For One, but All For One would do his absolute best to keep him away as far as possible. Deku getting closer and closer every time, but never fully being able to succeed, would then be blown away towards the direction of the unconscious Mr. Compress. Deku, looking down, would notice that Mr. Compress actually has a gun nearby him, and Izuku would smirk as he picks it up so fast All For One wouldn't even take note of this. He would run around All For One, as All For One would say, "How many times are you going to do this, boy, as, you know, Deku would say as many times as it takes, going in to rush in, fainting, as All-For-One would create the barrier once more, and Izuku, taking note of this, would be like, perfect. He would, you know, then like loop around him, as All-For-One wasn't expecting this, before shooting a couple of bullets towards the direction of All-For-One, and a couple of them would actually make contact, with them ricocheting off of his head, as Deku realizes that bullets aren't exactly going to be too useful here if he's aiming for headshots. So he would use his gun alongside his sword to try to get closer and closer towards the direction of All-For-One, but ultimately he decides that he's just gonna go for it, and what to hell with whatever damage he receives from trying to come up close to All-For-One. So Deku would proceed to get a runway as he runs towards the direction of All-For-One, and beams and energy waves and air cannons would be shot towards him, and dark balls would come flying towards him, and multipliers would be added onto those quirks, but Deku does not care. He's running through the damage, just tanking it, as breaking through the final barrier, Deku would show an evil grin as he just cuts into All-For-One's neck, before then taking the blade out and stabbing him right in the stomach, similarly to what he would have done to Gojo, before then using his blade once more to cut his arm off and leaving the dead body of All-For-One there on the ground, as Deku would not be, you know, without any injuries. The man definitely ended up taking some gruesome ones, and he would have a black tendril going through his shoulder, but it didn't matter, because in this moment, Deku would prove that even though he was a weakling, born without a quirk, not knowing that he has heavenly restriction, would have been strong enough to defeat the most powerful character with as many quirks as he could imagine. Deku in this moment would feel like that's more than enough validation that he'll ever need in terms of moving forward with the story, and after this would take place, he would call the police, which would already have arrived, you know, considering that they weren't exactly going to ignore the explosions, and they would just capture All-For-One, Shigaraki, like every single person that was present just gets absolutely captured by the heroes. And now the League of Villains threat that they would have imposed in the original story would be completely gone. So that just ends up leaving us with the last villain of the story, or maybe two if you want to consider Redestro in case the heroes ever go after them. Then you have Overhaul and Redestro. But considering the fact that Mirio is mainly the character who's going to be going for Overhaul, I say we can scratch that one off the list. I don't see Zuku going with Mirio if he was to have another opportunity to take an internship. I can 100% see him going with Mirko again, just because he formed a pretty cool bond with her, and so Mirio would be the only one going for the Shei Hisaki arc, so he'd be the only one to actually take him out, and considering that in this timeline he has One for All alongside his permeation quirk, he's going to be more than enough to take Overhaul out and even be able to protect Eri from whatever it is that Overhaul tries to do. Even his gigantic form, the monster form that Deku would have fought against, would be a piece of cake, and the Overhaul arc would essentially be wiped out by Mirio himself if we really needed to get into it. The Redestro stuff, that's actually a little bit more of an interesting section of the story, but considering that I haven't really seen the My Villain Academia arc and paid as much attention to it as I should, I just wouldn't be able to do enough justice to that arc to even cover it. So I think this would probably be a good spot to leave the story off. Of all the main villains have been taken out, Deku continues going to school for the following years, and he eventually graduates. And with the League of Villains having been taken out, the crime rates across Japan would just skyrocket to the floor, meaning that most of the pro heroes that end up going, like, being a big thing, like in the future, they end up kind of losing their jobs, and Deku, funny enough, ends up pretty much working for Yaoyorozu's company, marrying her in the future, and then taking over as, you know, vice president of the company. Not even becoming a hero at the end of the day, because crime rates just go by so low, and thanks to this new society where even quirkless people are not viewed as complete weaklings thanks to Deku's change in society's view, everything just changes for the My Hero Academia story. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where What If Deku Was Toji's Reincarnation is going to be ending. If you guys are going to be wanting to hear me talk a little bit more about What If Deku Was Toji's Reincarnation, I made a video alongside that one weeb a little bit ago where we did a podcast style video where me and him were bouncing ideas off and forth of each other, and we covered the story with a completely different take on there. So if you guys want to go watch that, it'll be down below in the link in the description. But with all that finally out of the way, thank you so much, bro, for commissioning this video for me, and for all of you guys to have actually enjoyed it. So his comment's probably going to be the pinned one down below. So go leave him a thank you for this video, which was incredible for me to make. But with that being said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Xehther. Leave a like on the video, and I am out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die! That wasn't the line, Kachan! Whatever!